Good morning, everyone. Test, check. If I could have everybody grab a seat, we'll go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and get started. We have our webinar up and running. So welcome to you folks that are remote. We're running just a few minutes late to getting everything set up. So, huh? A little more volume, like that. Is that good? Okay, so you gotta really get close to this. I get the wrong mic.
Do you want to laugh? Do you want to laugh?
Like a handheld would be great. Yeah. I didn't know that was a different kind of mic.
Yeah, it's just on the table.
Awesome.
Group discussion.
All right.
Push that when it turns green, you're good. It's trying to connect. There you go.
Check. Okay, very good. Welcome. Welcome to our sixth annual meeting of the Multi-State Fleet Response Working Group. My name is Tom Moran, and I have the pleasure to host today and work with all of you innovators. And we got a lot to cover today. So first up, I'm going to introduce Bill Kelbaugh. Bill is the manager of emergency preparedness here at PECO. Bill, on behalf of all of us, thank you again, you and Colleen and staff, for hosting the 6th annual meeting. And we'll get rocking. So help me welcome Mr. Bill Kelbaugh. You can clap.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Philadelphia. Is it 6 years already we've been doing this together? Wow, that's remarkable. Time flies. See a lot of familiar faces, but how many people here are here for the first time? If I could see a show of hands. Oh, awesome. That's great. Yeah, I think I was in this job for about 3 days when I got to my first meeting here where we were hosting it, and was just trying to get my feet under me as far as emergency preparedness and things. And what I've come to learn is this meeting each year is a tremendous opportunity. Speaking for the electrical industry, we spend a lot of time going to conferences and exercising the mutual assistance process and doing best practices and assessments across the industry to help us learn from each other and do a better job deploying resources and restoring service to customers and things. So that's a well-established thing in the electric industry. But this is a tremendous opportunity to learn from other sectors and the government and learn how to help each other to restore power and restore services of these critical services to areas that are impacted. It's super important work, and appreciate everybody's time to come out here and help and learn from each other. I would definitely recommend, rather than kind of clustering into little pockets of utility people and government people and things, try to interact, across sectors. And I'm sure there's a lot of great opportunities that will evolve from that. Remember the first meeting, John Shaner was up here, my buddy John, in his usual laid back and kind of real chill approach to things, describing a whole lot of things that he wanted this group to pursue. And I remember thinking, wow, that's really a lot. Kind of skeptical about the ability to pull that much off. And before too long, we started getting PDFs of emergency declarations and communications between the sectors, and all kinds of cool stuff started happening. And a lot of the issues that we've seen historically with moving resources from region to region across state lines and things started to become less and less. And now I don't hear nearly as many issues when we send resources off system with delays at way stations and toll booths and things like that. So this group's done a tremendous job already. And of course, there's always more work to do to streamline things and to get better. So really, enforce the approach. Try to learn from each other in this forum. It's pretty unique, and it's a great opportunity. So please take advantage of it. So thanks. With that, I'll turn it back to Tom.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, it has been our 6th year. John Shaner wasn't able to come today. I hope he's able to dial in. So we'll be channeling John and his passion about this for a while. You all can hear okay with the microphone? Good? Okay. Let me introduce our chair for the Fleet Response Working Group, Mike Sapone. John Shaner was the initial chair. Now we have Mike Sapone as the chair, and Tony Hurley is the co-chair. So, Mike, I'll turn it over to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. Oh, my goodness. Good morning, everyone. A little bit better. If you ever get an invitation the night before a meeting to attend the pre-meeting meeting from Tom Moran, I strongly suggest you do it. The only reason I'm trying to fire you up is because last night the group that got together needed no urging it all to get fired up, and we had a real passionate conversation around the things that this group is trying to do and continues to do, as Bill had mentioned. So bring your enthusiasm, bring your energy. We need it. We all need it. The people and constituents and customers that we serve deserve it. So bring your energy and let's collaborate and let's get let's move the ball forward today. So welcome to this year's annual meeting of the Multi-State Fleet Response Working Group. I certainly want to thank Bill Kelbaugh, PICO, City of Philadelphia, once again agreeing to host us, and of course, congratulations to the Eagles, and coming from Connecticut. Okay, that's enough. It's been a very active season. It's been a very active season, not just in football, but for all of us, both in the private and the public sector. I know the public sector has been equally challenged, both from a weather and non-weather event. Speaking of that, just a quick taking a minute to recognize my colleagues, your colleagues, our colleagues, both in Nashville and in as recently as yesterday in Toronto, dealing with senseless violence. The people in this room, as well as our colleagues out there, are the type of people that run to people in need. So just a second to recognize them and wish them well going forward today and dealing with some of the tragedies that we all face day to day. Again, it's been a very active season. It really is no coincidence that we rise and we respond and we succeed or we fail together, both from a private and public collaborative effort standpoint. Based on that, we need to continuously improve, to continue to explore new ways to leverage the capabilities that each of our organizations possesses. All of us hoping for that big breakthrough or that big play that's going to break the game wide open and change the game going forward. In fact, we're looking for key play calling and big play makers that may very well reside in sectors outside of our own. A perfect example of that, and maybe Tom will mention this later, but we were speaking of the meeting, pre-meeting meeting last night, we were struggling with how to catalog the services of this organization, how we were going to do it, and the reference to the Sears catalog came up, or I'm not even sure if I have that right, Tom, but you never know when you're sitting around a table with people with a great deal of talent and experience. You never know where your next big idea, your next big play is going to come from. And certainly last night it came from a very unexpected guest that we had with us and turned out to be a good friend, but he threw a scientific librarian suggestion out there last night, and turns out it's probably just the idea we were looking for, but hadn't thought of it. So you never know where the next big play is going to come from. It could come from someone sitting right next to you at dinner that may have something to offer, but it's until you take the time to sit down with people and put your energies together, until you're able to do that and ready to do that, those types of great breakthrough plays could elude you for the entire season. So that being said, things like the Canadian border crossing bill mentioned that, way station bypass, easy pass, flexibility on tolls, all benefits, and I can speak personally to the residents of Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire have all benefited from the work that this group has done. Let's see. A large number of those residents are customers of Eversource Energy. Obviously, great strategy and playmakers from both private and public sectors coming together continuously. Not just a one-time deal. It's a living relationship that has to be nurtured continuously because players change, right? Coaches change. Things change continuously. So you have to constantly get back to the drawing board, back to the whiteboard to figure out who the players are, where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are, and leverage them for the benefit of those people that we serve. I always say that the private and public sectors are two great machines. If they oppose one another, it's a tug of war to end all tug of wars, right? It's a stalemate that will never move the ball anywhere. However, if you take the horsepower of that private and public sector, you put them on the same side of the chain, pulling in one direction, there really is no opponent that I can think of that exists that can take the title. So think about that. Get us all on one side of the chain. So why are we here? Well, our executive director, Tom Moran, is going to come up next, and he's going to make sure everybody fully understands that. But we're here to open our playbooks, right? You think about playbooks, right? If you ever look, you've got a coach on the sideline, and what does he do, or she does? They got their playbook up against their mouth. They don't even want anybody to see their lips on TV, right? They don't want anybody stealing their information, or they keep that playbook tucked in the back of their pants, right? You see that on the field as well. We're here to open our playbooks, open them up and let everybody see our playbooks. We want everybody to take advantage of the talent, not just use it for our own good. We're here to expose and discover some playmakers capable of taking the offensive and defensive strategies we possess and leverage them together to form the best practices for what? For the next game. We're here to build a winning team because at the end of the game, we really are on the same team. And believe me, if you think I was rooting for or playing for the 4 consecutive Nor'easters we just dealt with in the North and in the Northeast, you're sadly mistaken. We're all on the same team. I'm pretty sure no one else in this room was rooting for him either. So with that, I thank you for coming. And I welcome Tom Moran again to come up and give us a few words and let us know what we're in for today. You got me?
Good morning. We had a great time last night. The work of the consortium and the fleet work group is people work, right? It's not technology, it's not data, it's people, it's trust. When I retired from Verizon in 2003, one of the things that I promised I would do is I would try to work again by people I choose to work with that were fun, okay? They're fun to be around. They were innovative and they wanted results. And we've collected over time kind of an army of people that really want to do that. So today you're going to hear about some perspectives. You know, one of the things I learned early on working in the consortium, we hired a consulting group called The Clearing out of Washington, D.C., and we had a board meeting. John Shaner was there, and it was that board meeting we had states and utilities come together, and it was a private meeting facilitated. And in 5 minutes into the meeting, the utilities and the states were head-to-head. I mean, this was a serious, real conversation, finger pointing. You know, John had his face turned red. The whole point was arguing around, and the missing link was trust. And there was a graphic. They facilitated this meeting. There was a picture that came out of this meeting that showed a canoe going over a waterfall, and at the bottom of the waterfall was like 5 alligators. And in the canoe were 2 bodies, two individuals. One in the front was government with a paddle, and in the back was private sector with a paddle. And the whole thing was, we're in this canoe together, guys. We sink or swim together. And that bonded in July of 2012, the beginnings of this trust network that started forming. And sure enough, Sandy hit in the fall of 2012, and the Fleet Working Group was born on January 13. And it was all about working together, building trust. And that whole thing about trust is important. So you're going to hear some perspectives on we have a private sector panel of what happened during Harvey, Irma, Maria. We have a state panel that's looking at public sector pieces of that as well. We've got some innovations that we just ran out of time. We could have 20 of them. We picked 3 that we can kind of hit in the lightning round. We'll have a panel this afternoon on how do we share information together. Jeff Dorco was there after our board meeting. We had a number of folks there looking at how do we work together to share information by use case, not by flood, right? Let's pick a problem and let's align the people and the data to fix that problem. If we can do something short-term, mid-term, long-term, and then move to the next problem. Let's not create armies and portals and things that people can't remember the passwords like me. And let's do it fast and quick. And so you'll see today, you'll hear a little bit about the App Store, the SICE, the Sensitive Information Sharing Work Group is building this product with DHS in partnership. So just a couple thoughts. What we're trying to do here is innovate and improve and enhance. We're not trying to improve a certain process. You know, most people won't take time if they're just going to make a little improvement. The whole point here is to reinvent something so it's faster and better and simpler. And there's so many processes that we can do this. The Fleet Working Group really looks at that. Partner versus isolate. I think the isolation mindset is still very prevalent in our country, but working together, if we focus on the citizens, we've discovered we can partner together and build trust as we go, like we learned last night, right? Of how we can say, hey, forget the politics of it. Let's fix the problem, and by doing that, we kind of unite. Results versus talk. I think that was one of the biggest things. All of us have plenty of meetings to go to where we talk. Okay, we need results. And so everything the Fleet Working Group does with the consortium and the board is all about building results. What can we do tangibly to produce that? And the last one is sustainment. What are we going to do today that's going to sustain beyond the next election? Our folks in government are plagued with these things called elections in a free country, right? And just by the time I get to know Greg McShane at DHS, there's an election and Greg's gone. Okay, now I got to start all over. So the consortium, Jeff Thomas and I talk about this all the time. How do we sustain, right? And that's a reality. We have to put the elephant in the middle of the room. And if we go into it thinking about sustainment, we will build partnerships and governance structures that allows government to lead on these issues and private sector to lead on those issues, and they support each other. And it's worked very well. So we plan for sustainment all the time. So with that, I'm going to one announcement. We just released our annual report from 2017. It went out this morning. I brought a couple of copies here. It basically encapsulates the partnerships, the projects, initiatives, the board members, and so forth. It's on. You had an email. It's on the web, and you can download. There's a web copy. There's a print copy, and you can get copies of that. So we were going to do that in January, but most of the group was in Puerto Rico doing work, so we had to post. But we had a hard time getting back from Puerto Rico. So next up, I have the pleasure of introducing 3 new board members. The consortium is run by a board of public and private sector individuals. Some are active government. Some are former government, some are private sector. So you're going to hear from 3 of them today. First up is Chris Eisenbray from Edison Electric Institute, representing the electric sector. Then you're going to hear from Kelly McKinney. Kelly is currently in the health sector at NYU Langone, formerly with New York City Office of Emergency Management. And then Bud Mertz. Bud's with the director of Westmoreland County Public Safety. And Bud's had a long history with us, was former board president, retired for a little bit, and now is back. So first up, I will introduce Mr. Chris Eisenbray. Chris?
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for that nice round of applause. Appreciate it. So we've got Kelly and Bud on the phone, you said?
Yes.
Okay, so a panel of 1 for now, I guess. Chris Eisenbray, again, Edison Electric Institute. We are the trade association based in Washington, D.C. of the investor-owned electric utilities. So Pico Energy, here are our gracious hosts. They're a member company of ours. If you're from Chicago, Commonwealth Edison. If you're from New York, Consolidated Edison. If you're from California, which I'm sure many of you are not because we're mostly focused on the East Coast here, Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California, Edison, those types of companies. So the investor-owned or shareholder-owned electric utilities. We make up about 70 to 75% of the marketplace, whether you measure it by customers served, electricity delivered, those type of revenues. We have sister trade associations that we work very closely with, the American Public Power Association, which represents the municipals and public power utilities. Sam Rosenberg, who's in the back there, if you want to raise your hand, he represents APPA. He's a great partner of ours. Also the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. They represent thousands of cooperative utilities that operate in this country. Also a great partner of ours. Before I get into my background and how I got involved in all hazards and kind of my perspective on this past year's hurricane and storm season and how all hazards supported that and the Fleet Working Group, I'm very happy to be in Philadelphia. My family is from here originally, though my father worked for General Electric. I moved around a lot growing up, but I'm a avid Eagles, Phillies, Sixers. They're all having really good season. I don't know about those Flyers. They got bounced the other night, so I wanted to give you a little bit of background on my family's history here in Philadelphia. And it won't take long. So starting back in 1752, I'm just kidding. No, but honestly, my family came here, my dad's side, in 1752 before this country was a country. We had property, the modern day site of Philadelphia Police Department is where we had our family had some property there. So pretty deep roots here, and would like to also thank PICO for hosting today. Bill Kelbaugh and Colleen for all the work they do here. My grandfather and great-grandfather both worked at Philadelphia Electric Company, now modern-day PICO Energy. So they both also went to Drexel University right down the street. So even though I've never lived in this city, I have very strong ties to it. My background, or what I do at Edison Electric Institute and what my team does at Edison Electric Institute, I run the Business Continuity and Operations group there. Again, I mentioned EEI is a public policy organization. We do lobbying on the Hill, regulatory work in front of the various agencies. But starting after Superstorm Sandy, we started getting a little more operational at EEI, not because we felt like we had to help our members or to support our members, because our members wanted our support and our assistance and wanted to utilize EEI as a kind of an organization and facilitator of our member companies in more operational and emergency response types of efforts. So that journey started again during Superstorm Sandy. Gail Royster, who's sitting here, many of you know, is on our team. Mike Mangas is also at the front table here, is the newest member of our team. In fact, I feel like I barely know Mike because he joined EEI in August. And as soon as he found his desk and where he was going to sit at EEI and work, Hurricane Harvey hit, and then Hurricane Irma, and then Hurricane Maria. And he has basically been our point person, working with Gail and other team members on how do we support our members and our industry through some of those efforts. In fact, I talked to Mike the other day, and I said, Mike, we're thinking about changing the name of our group. So, think about, you might have to change your title. So, take your business cards and make sure that you get those updated with your new title. And he said, Chris, I don't even have business cards yet because I got in the door and we didn't even have a chance to, get business cards issued for the guy because he just hit the ground running with all the support and effort that was required of our members for all this year's storm season. So a little bit of the background about what we do. We have a mutual assistance committee that Gail runs. We have a business continuity committee amongst our members that Gail also runs. We have a spare transformer equipment program that another staff member of ours, Wally Melio, runs. That deals also with a lot of the transportation issues. How do you, if you have large power transformers that are damaged because of weather, because of an earthquake, because of terrorism, how do you move those large equipment from state to state, from region to region under emergency conditions? So we work around those issues as well. So Tom, do you want me to get into some of these questions that you posed? I gave you a little bit of, a little bit of background on All Hazards Consortium. So again, we're a lobbying organization. Superstorm Sandy hits. Our companies are responding. Obviously, a very large event. Many outages, 8 to 10 million outages. It had national press focus. It had federal government focus. And the CEOs of our organization, the CEOs of the companies that make up our organization, really wanted EEI to help them get through and support their efforts with that particular storm. One of the issues that we were having trouble and our members were having trouble with, and I think Bill alluded to the fact that you don't see this as much anymore, and it's probably an attest to the great work that Fleet Response Working Group and the All Hazards Consortium is doing, is we had a lot of issues during Sandy with the movement of resources from region to region, state to state, as we tried to get those resources from the north and the south and the west into the East Coast, into the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania areas. We had a lot of problems at toll stations, at way stations, fleets of our crews getting pulled over by, state troopers who were just doing their job. No harm there, but any delay in that movement of resources would really, on the back end, slow down some of the response and the restoration efforts on the back end. So my job, I was working on smart grid modernization issues at EEI, but during Sandy, my job was to try to fix or solve or improve some of these transportation issues. I had no background in this at all. We found our way through making phone calls and talking to the federal government partners, whether it was Department of Transportation or Department of Energy, and we slowly but surely kind of made some progress in that on the fly and in real time on some of those issues and getting those crews through some of those choke points. About a week after we got through Sandy and our members got through Superstorm Sandy, I heard about this guy named Tom Moran and heard that, oh, he's already working on all these issues that I was asked to try to help and solve. So I just called him up one day and he gave me a background on what the All Hazards Consortium is and what the Fleet Response Working Group was doing. And I said, Tom, where were you 3 weeks ago? I really could have used your help, but I kind of put that aside and said, going forward, we're gonna work with this group so that we can continue to improve these issues and continue to make improvements in other issues as well. And there's a lot of different issues and areas that we're focusing on. So Tom and the All Hazards Consortium, the Fleet Response Working Group, we've been great strategic partners for about 5 years now. I think this is probably my 5th or 6th annual meeting I've been here for, and as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the best investment in time and effort, and actual, we do put some skin in the game. We do fund some of the work of the Fleet Response Working Group, and it's been a great investment, and can't say enough about the work that Tom and actually everyone in this room and people who aren't in this room do to help our industry work with the public sector to work through these issues. Let's see. So I want to steal a little bit of what Bill said. I mean, I'm not seeing a lot of these issues on the transportation side that we used to see. It used to be a pretty big issue, but I think that the community and the network and the information sharing that this group has done over the last couple of years has really raised the awareness around those issues. Private sector is aware of them, public sector is aware of these issues, and they work to help alleviate some of those problems. As far as going forward, what I'm looking at, or as a member of the board of this organization, it's just continue to keep your eye on the ball of the fleet response and the movement of those resources. We don't really want to rest on our laurels and expect that everything has been solved. We want to keep improving and I think keeping it sustainable, as Tom mentioned. And just continue to make the connections that we need to make, because a lot of the faces are different here today than they were a year ago and the year before that. And it's really the people and keeping those connections and that network together that's really going to solve the problems and increase the flow of these resources that we need from my industry's perspective. So I hope that covered it, Tom. I'm happy to stand up here while Bud and Kelly speak, or what would you like me to do? That's number one. Yeah, can we solve that problem first?
Yeah, we'll work with it.
Thank you, Chris. On the phone, Kelly McKinney. Kelly, you there?
Hey, Tom.
Very good. Kelly and I have known each other for years. Kelly, I'll let you introduce yourself and, at least from a remote standpoint, let folks kind of hear from you.
Thanks, Tom. As you said, we've known each other for many years. I joined the New York City Office of Emergency Management in 2006. I was in city government for about 10 years. So, that's where Tom and I met. I grew to admire the work that he was doing, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But at OEM, one of the things that we admired was the work that the electric sector did and how it shared resources in disasters. It's something that we all need to model, and it's pure execution. And I think that really is a word that is not used enough in this business. And on the government side, there are a lot of players in the disaster business: the local government, the state government, the federal government, and they all, they're all proficient in the business. But in many ways, they work within silos, and that silo mentality permeates the business that we're in. And I think that really is the magic that Tom and the All Hazards Consortium brings to this disaster business, is how do we penetrate those silo walls with tools and methods and playbooks that can penetrate through the silo walls and allow us to execute in the moment. That really is the key. So I was in city government for about 10 years. I'm now in the health sector, and my organization is along with just about every healthcare organization is consolidating into networks. The healthcare business is changing very rapidly, and I'm here today because we're getting ready to open a 900-bed state-of-the-art hospital with all single-bed private rooms and technology-driven. It's a very dynamic business, and a very but at the same time, this business is on the front lines, right? I mean, we saw what happened in Nashville on Sunday. We saw what happened yesterday in Toronto. We are learning those lessons here in New York City. We are a threat-rich environment in New York. We have every day we live with the specter of not only man-made incidents, but natural hazards and technological hazards. So it's a very tough business, and we're only going to be successful if we can execute. And I think that's really what the All Hazards Consortium brings, is a notion of execution. And I'll just end with just a picture of the future for us. And one of the things that we are doing with Tom and together with Tom is we have a study that we're doing with the Department of Homeland Security. They have an RRAP program. I think many of you are familiar with the Regional Resiliency Assessment Program, the RRAP. And we're just completing a comprehensive study of supply chain issues in the New York metropolitan area. What does the supply chain look like for healthcare? What does it look like for those critical sources of supply that allow us to do patient care? And I can tell you it's a very complicated answer. And we're going to work through a group that we have here, the top 16 academic medical centers. We have a group that we have convened through NYU Langone that's across the country. It's the Mayo Clinics and the Johns Hopkins and the Penn, University of Pennsylvania Medical Center. And we're going to work through them to learn the lessons of that RRAP program and then to implement those actionable solutions that you guys are all familiar with that have been done through the Fleet Response Working Group. The Fleet Response Working Group is really a model. We want to replicate the model in healthcare. We want to move the needle in healthcare just the way you guys have done on the energy side. And so with that, Tom, I'll turn it back to you.
Very good. Thank you, Kelly. Next up is Bud Mertz. Bud, you with us?
Yes, I am. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Good morning. Loud and clear.
All right. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. My apologies for not being able to make it out to the meeting today. I'm the County Director of Public Safety here in Westmoreland County, which is in the western part of the state of Pennsylvania here, real close to Pittsburgh. So for the Flyer fans in the audience, my condolences as the Penguins moved on to the next round of the playoff.
This is where we all boo.
But So I thank Tom for the introduction and the opportunity to speak. I've spent my entire life in the in the public sector. First of all, growing up in the town here, I've been a fireman locally my entire life. And I spent 25 years with the Pennsylvania State Police as a communications officer, as well as the instructor at the Pennsylvania State Police Academy. When I was fortunate enough to then move over and be appointed as the Deputy Director of the State Office of Homeland Security back in 2003. And if you figure that was a really unique time. So it's just like a year and a half after the tragic 9/11 occurrences, and the state was twisting, or the country was twisting around trying to figure out a way how we're going to protect our people from terrorism and the related effects there, and protect our critical infrastructure. And you build this. You create this Office of Homeland Security and the Department of Homeland Security, and it's like you're flying on an airplane built while you're still building the airplane. So I had the opportunity when I was the Deputy Director of Homeland Security to meet up with Tom at a couple events, and really got enthused with the idea of what the All Hazards Consortium was about, and what they were trying to do and what they were trying to build at the time. Because it was all new. You looked at all the many opportunities you have to protect and prevent. However, nobody had the game plan yet. And what I've seen with the All Hazards Consortium was that they were on the right track of combining a network of public and private sector to work together on this project. So during its conception, probably 2004, 2005, I wanted on board, and I wanted to be part of that. And I was, happy to not only see the dynamics of how the state was building in the prevention and protection piece of Homeland Security, but also be part of the building of the All Hazards Consortium at that time. It was an interesting concept then, because we were bringing in a lot of the executive level corporation, and they're sitting here in the room with the state level leads for Homeland Security, and that's when the light bulb goes off and you realize, wow, there's a whole another source of information there that we can tap into to do this better. And that's when Tom and I had talked, and what we did then was we created a working group for critical infrastructure protection. And we, through the All Hazards Consortium, we brought in the state leaders in the National Capital Region, the greater National Capital Region, I should say, as well as the corporate leaders, and we all spent a weekend up at State College and talked about things. And we learned their side, they learned our side, and things moved forward. So it was great to be part of that. It was great to help build that network to basically lead to where we are today. So after about 5 years in the Pennsylvania Office of Homeland Security, I was fortunate enough to go over to the over into the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, and was eventually then appointed as the bureau director that overseen the State Emergency Operations Center. And that's then when you move in beyond the prevention and the protection side of your mission, you now gain the experience of that response and the recovery side. And while I was with the PEMA, I had the unfortunate responsibilities to oversee the effects of Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee that struck Pennsylvania and basically devastated the eastern and the central portions of Pennsylvania within a 3-week period back in 2011. And that's when you wake up that one day and you find out that you have well over 1,100 families that didn't have a home to go to in your state, and they needed your assistance. It was a very real awareness that, hey, we have to do something. This is up to us. And through those two disasters, like I said, that were about 3 weeks apart, we utilized every resource we could, including what we could get from the All Hazards Consortium. And that's when I got to witness the Fleet Working Group and its capabilities. And I got to work with the Fleet Working Group during that period to even sharpen our skills of what we needed and support the group as well to go on. And of course, just shortly after that, in 2012, we faced Hurricane Sandy that came in. And although, New York and New Jersey, as you're aware, received an awful lot of the damage from the hurricane, Pennsylvania was also affected. In fact, leading up to the Hurricane Sandy, most of the plotting of the storm actually showed that it was going to strike Philadelphia and go catty-corner through Philadelphia, heading basically up to Erie was the storm track. And so we had to, at that point, organize our preparation of pre-positioning our resources where we felt that they were mostly going to be able to be best utilized. And that's everything from the Pennsylvania National Guard and the utility companies and everything else that we worked through for that, to then, fortunate for Pennsylvania, unfortunate for New York and New Jersey, at the last minute, the turn didn't happen, and it struck New York and New Jersey. But that didn't keep us out of the water. I mean, for two things. First of all, we did sustain a lot of damage from that storm, but we also had to be there to support our neighbors as well. I remember, getting the phone call at 8:30 in the morning saying from New Jersey saying that we're looking at all options and could Pennsylvania handle 5,000 relocated affected citizens if we had to bring them across the border. Now, that was all we really needed to know, but through a group efforts of both private and public entities, within a 4-hour period, we had set up and were prepared to handle those 5,000 at 2 separate locations on our eastern border of the state, getting ready for what they called then was a mega shelter of handling those people. And so it's throughout my experiences of disaster response and the prevention, protection, response, and recovery missions that we faced, I really got the opportunity to understand what this dialogue is, what these relationships and a sense of trust building between the private sector and the public sector has been. So after 35 years with the state, I retired and was sitting happily on my lounge chair with the remote control in my hand, and my phone went off and it said, there was one of our county commissioners says, "Hey, you're retired now, aren't you?" And like the mafia movie that they say, every time I try to get out, they drag me back in. Well, in 2014, June of 2014, I was appointed the Director of Public Safety for Westmoreland County. So currently, right now, I oversee, first of all, our 911 center, which we facilitate roughly 1,000 911 emergency calls a day, with 60 we call TCOs, dispatchers, with an average of 12 on per shift around the clock. I also see the emergency management side of it, which I have a staff of 7, and we support the 65 municipalities in Westmoreland County and the 65 local emergency management coordinators in coordinating their needs and during disasters at that level. And besides the emergency management side, the 911 side, I also oversee the hazardous material response team, where we have about 60 volunteers that respond to contain and protect the environment during any hazardous material incident that would occur in our county. And I oversee the Westmoreland County Park Police. It's a 44-member police department that oversee the law enforcement for all of the county properties in our county. So as I started up in that new job in the public sector, I got this nice phone call from Tom again that says, "Hey, how'd you like to come back on board?" So here I am. I couldn't be any happier. I want to get back involved in things and really support this concept, because I believe in the All Hazards Consortium. I always did. I enjoy seeing its growth, and I enjoy seeing its mission be better defined. But what's unique about Tom is there's always a new angle, and he's willing to try anything and everything for the cause. So I'm happy to be on board under Tom's leadership. That's about all I have.
Great. Thank you, Bud. We're going to move quickly into our next panel. So if I can have our panelists come up. There's been a lot of activity going on in many sectors: Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Texas, Florida. So we wanted to start off with a bang here today. So let me thank first Bud, you and Kelly. Thanks for joining. I know you guys had some. Yes, thank you. So while our panel's lining up, you have the agenda in front of you. We'll move. We had some technical issues getting started, but we'll make up the time here. So Chris is going to facilitate our first panel. This should be a great panel. Talk about innovation, right? I think this was a first timer on a lot of things. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I know we're pressed a little bit for time, or a little bit behind schedule, with a title like Post 2017 Hurricane Season Discussion Panel. I mean, this panel could go on for 5 hours with the amount of activity we had, but we're going to keep it to, what, about an hour and 15 minutes maybe? We'll give you a little flexible. Again, I'm very happy to be here. As I mentioned earlier, I'm happy to be facilitating this panel. I won't say distinguished, but this panel. They're a great bunch of guys, but they all have a very unique, though connected experience with this past year's hurricane and storm season. Whether it was the hurricanes that got a lot of the news, or wildfires, or obviously Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, they each bring experience from those events and different experiences. Sam Rosenberg, who I introduced a little earlier, he represents the American Public Power Association. So, like EEI, they support their members in their response to these events, both on the mainland and also in Puerto Rico, where one of their member companies is the utility there in Puerto Rico, and also in the Virgin Islands, one of their utilities is also a member of theirs, is the utility in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So Mike Mangus works in our group at EEI, 20 plus years of utility operator experience at both PICO and PPL. So he brings a lot of operational experience to our group, and it's interesting because he said when he was on the operator side, he really didn't understand what EEI did or does, and he's finding out the hard way what we do now that he's joined us, and he has a better understanding of kind of what our role is in support of our members in some of these events. Ken Kildow from the telecom sector. I've met Ken a couple different times through these events. They had a lot of experience. He'll talk a little bit about Harvey, Irma, Maria, a little bit of experience with the wildfire, so we'll bring that into the conversation. And then Mike Zappone, Eversource Energy, former chair of the committee that EEI has for mutual assistance and emergency preparedness. I think you just rolled off, like a week and a half ago, Mike? He also spent 70 plus days down in Puerto Rico. Mike was also down in Puerto Rico for probably 8 to 9 weeks, here and there. He'd come back for a day or a couple days, go back down, organizing our members who did a lot of the response down in Puerto Rico. But Mike served as the logistics chief down under the organization that was running the restoration down in Puerto Rico. So again, lots of experience in not just Puerto Rico, but the entire hurricane season in 2017, but they also bring unique perspectives of kind of what their day jobs are at the various organizations that they represent. So want to go down the line and just kind of get a couple minutes from each one of them on a little bit more detail beyond what I just laid out, kind of what their roles are at their organizations, what their experiences were during this historic season, and then we'll get into some Q&A with them. So, Sam, do you want to kick it off?
Thanks, Chris. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So, like Chris said, I work for the American Public Power Association. Just quick overview of who we are, what we do. So, we represent community-owned, not-for-profit public power utilities, power homes and businesses in 2,000 communities. Some examples are City of Los Angeles, Department of Water Power, Orlando Utilities Commission, and then on the small side, City of Easton, Maryland, Manassas, Virginia. So like Chris said, we're the voice for our members in the DC area, and we also assist with mutual aid and disaster response. My role in particular is cyber security, physical security, and then the disaster response mutual aid part. So, very involved this past season with the hurricanes, both on the mainland and with Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. A lot of great coordination, collaboration with Mike and Chris on the industry efforts to respond to Puerto Rico. And the Virgin Islands, a number of our members went to support their sister utility in the Virgin Islands as well. And then, numerous utilities went to Florida to assist the public power utilities and the investor-owned and cooperative utilities in Florida. So, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks. We'll use.
You broke that one too. I'm practiced on this.
Oh, there we go.
Push it
Can everybody hear me? What's that?
Hold it down.
Okay.
Don't press.
Okay. Now I got it. Technical issues up here. Mike Mangus with Edison Electric Institute. You can hear me? Okay, good. Mike Mangus with Edison Electric Institute, and good morning. Glad to be here. As Chris mentioned, started my career over 20-some years ago here at Pico Energy, and then about 14 years later, went up to PPL Electric Utilities to assist in building their emergency restoration plan up at PPL Electric Utilities in Pennsylvania. And then just a couple of months ago, went down to Edison Electric Institute to basically help the industry instead of just helping one company. My desire was, how can I better help the industry? And then since then, it's been a long journey with many of the hurricanes. I think there's a common trend here. I got to EEI, and about 5 days later, we had Harvey, Irma, and Maria. So I think the common thread is probably me. When I went to PPL, right after I got to PPL, we had, trying to think of it, we had Sandy, and before that, we had, not Irma, yep. So I think there's a common trend here. Whenever I leave and go to another company, that's when we have a bad hurricane outbreak season. But it's been a really good journey. one of the things at EEI we really focus on is, you'll hear a lot from EEI, is unity of message, unity of effort, just making sure that in our industry, we're all working together for one mission, one cause, and making sure that the message going out to both public and private sector is all unified under one message. Very critical. As I came to EEI, one of the things I first realized is just the value of that unity of message going forward, just making sure that all our members, all the public and state and private and agencies are all aligned with that unity of message. Very critical going forward. One of the really things I learned up front coming to EEI. So with that, I'm looking forward to being on this panel. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ken Kildow. Tom, is it on? No? There we go. Okay, let's try again. My name is Ken Kildow. I'm the Director of Business Continuity at Verizon. Okay, let's try this one more time.
I'm glad I'm not the
and
only
I'm from the communications industry, by the way.
Okay, training. Push it, just push it once. Give it a minute, and it'll turn green.
Okay, got it. Okay, my name's Ken Kildow. I'm the Director of Business Continuity at Verizon. I started at Verizon 22 years ago and worked in a number of roles in both field operations and network operations before I got a tap on the shoulder and said, hey, we got an opportunity for you over at Business Continuity. And I'll tell you, it's one of the best professional moves I've made in my career. I have the privilege of leading our business continuity and emergency management team, and had a breadth of experience for both Harvey and Irma last year, as well as the wildfires out in California. A little less so for our direct response in Puerto Rico, but I'll be able to talk a little bit about indirect response as well. And I think there might be some observations that you'll find useful there as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off.
Okay, again, I'm Mike Sapone with Eversource Energy. I live in the state of Connecticut, but my responsibilities are Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Primarily the mutual assistance emergency preparedness manager, coordinator for the company. I also am past chair of the EEI Executive Committee on Mutual Assistance, current chairman of the Fleet Working Group. I'm also a past chairman of the North Atlantic Mutual Assistance Group, which was a combination of New York, New England, and the Mid-Atlantic. Got involved with Tom and the group several years ago. I stepped like Mike Menges. I stepped into a role that had to do with emergency preparedness in 2010. March 2010, basically the southwest area of Connecticut was devastated by a windstorm, and I just haven't stopped since, it seems. As our, one of the things I see is as our workforces and the business climates begin and continue to change, the need for us to work together and leverage each other's talents as well as resources is going to become increasingly important as weather systems are, going to be, they say, are going to maybe not increase in quantity, but certainly in intensity. And nowhere was that proven more than in Puerto Rico. I was extremely happy. I say this all the time. If it ever happened again, I'd go. And if I got a chance to go back, I'd do it in a heartbeat to finish the job. So, happy to be part of the panel. 32 years in the electric utility industry, all in electric operations. But I've learned an awful lot from the public sector. And certainly no more was that more prevalent than my learning experience in Puerto Rico. So happy to be part of the panel as well with these fine gentlemen.
Great. So we'll get into some questions now. I'm going to throw this out to the full panel and just, anybody decide who they want to take it. Maybe all four of you would like to take this. But, we all know that this was a historic hurricane season with those, our friends Harvey, Irma, Maria, probably a couple others that we, in a traditional storm season we would have been worried about, but we had some pretty major storms competing with those. I think there was one called Jose that I kind of forgot about already, just because of the magnitude of the other three. But what did you see? What was unique or different about this year beyond the magnitude, beyond maybe one storm after another? That does happen from time to time. In 2004, I recall that. But what about the response? What was different? What was better? What worked better? What may have been more of a challenge with 2017 compared to some of the other events that you've either worked on or supported, either from a utility or trade association or the telecommunications sector?
So I'll go ahead and kick that off. So kind of like what Mike said, I too started off at an electric utility at Duke Energy, which is one of Chris and Mike's members. Was there for 6 years, and then I went to the trade side to assist, the industry at large. What I noticed from this past season was that the coordination and collaboration amongst our industry peers, so between the investor-owned utilities, the public power utilities, and the rural cooperatives, was amazing. The unity of effort, unity of message was on point. We were all joined at the hip, essentially, on that. And then all of us together with our federal government partners. I don't know, this was my first hurricane season at a trade association. So prior to this, I don't know if the Secretary of Energy was involved in conference calls daily with the industry, with the electric industry, but he was this past season. And that was amazing to me. The amount of input and assistance from our federal government partners at FEMA and at DOE and DHS. It was a great collaboration, especially with the unique challenge of moving crews to islands like Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands. In the past, there had been crews traveled by military aircraft to U.S. Virgin Islands. That wasn't an option this year, so we looked at barging, and FEMA was helpful in that, and as well as private industry. So, thanks, Chris. Mike.
I would echo a lot that Sam just mentioned about, especially coming from the utility side, walking into Harvey and Chris taking us up to the fourth floor where the EEI, we'll call it the war room, is. Just listening to the first couple of calls with the Secretary of Energy on there and all of our industry calls, and we were working closely with Mike Sapone and the NMARC team and the NREC team, and just getting that whole unity of message to make sure that all of our companies, all the APPA companies, NRE, ECA companies are all working together in coordination with each other, and that unity of message going out, just speaking as an industry as a whole, was incredibly valuable and actually really eye-opening to me from as a utility member sitting on the other side of the fence, never really understanding all the coordination behind the scenes that go on at the federal level and state level. Really reassuring, and not sure if I could say the same thing happened in Sandy, but from my experience there, every storm is a learning opportunity. Every storm is we have the ability to get better. And one thing as the industry, I really see this industry as a whole learning, and I'm not just talking about the electrical industry, but all the industries here really take pride in these opportunities to learn and grow. So as we progress through all these storms, I do see learnings and new improvements being put into place after every storm.
I'll just comment on two things. First, at both the federal and state level, I see a real transition from a regulated regulator relationship to a collaborative relationship. And I think we see great dividends, not only in emergency response, but in day-to-day operations. And it was very refreshing during the storm season this year, and really in all of our work with the state and federal agencies. I think it's something that we can all continue to build on going forward, and really paid a lot of dividends through the storm season this year. The other thing I think I would comment is, from my perspective, I saw the impact of the 9 months leading up to the storm season. We very often talk about the response and the preparations for the response immediately preceding a major event, but for me, one of the big learnings this year was the value of the 9 months of preparation that is not directly for business continuity or emergency response, but has to be embedded across your organization and become part of your daily operations. And I think in terms of maintenance work for our power backup systems, for the work that we do on making sure that the telecom network has a lot of diversity in it, and that we are building all of the right, both public-private and private-private relationships so that we are ready to respond during a major emergency, and really saw the fruits of that labor during this storm season.
For me, again, just two concepts. One is the incident command system. I'll thank the public sector for the incident command system and the fact that the private sector during times of emergency preparedness and restoration have adopted, for the most part, there's still a long way to go, but have adopted that framework, getting both the private and public sectors together with a common framework, which I'll call the incident command system, or some framework very similar to it, depending on the situation, has created unified command. And unified command is really what is necessary for these sectors to work collaboratively together towards a common goal, or a common, a common restoration effort. Unity of effort, unity of message, unified command, the incident command system. The other thing I'll credit is the fact that we are also exercising together. We are finally opening up our doors to one another and saying, why don't you come in and see our exercise that we're doing? In fact, why don't you participate? You can be an observer. You can be a controller. You can play part in our sim cell. Yeah, this is terminology I did not know several years ago, but I'm getting better at it, and it's because we're now doing these things together from a simulation standpoint that we are getting much better when the time comes for real activity in real situations. So I'll credit those two things that I hope will continue and continue to improve.
Great, thanks everyone. So one of the reasons we're all sitting in this room today and not be outside with the beautiful weather finally is because we all care about fleet movement, or movement of resources, supply chain issues. I wanted to pull on the thread a little bit. Maybe Sam, Mike, anybody on the panel, your thoughts on the fleet movement issues, improvements you've seen over the years, and that kind of came to roost during 2017. But also, can you talk a little bit in the context of Puerto Rico or in the Virgin Islands, the movement of resources, particularly the bucket trucks down to the ports to get them over to Puerto Rico, and what were the logistical challenges around that effort, and how did the work of the All Hazards Consortium and the Fleet Response Working Group specifically help in that effort?
So, with regards to how things are better, or have they have changed, the past couple of years, there were little to no issues that our members experienced this past hurricane season, as far as getting their trucks from their home location to the requesting utility, or in the case of Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, the port. For the Virgin Islands effort, we had utilities from Wisconsin, Missouri, South Carolina, and Florida go to West Palm Beach and take a barge or ship to the Virgin Islands. We experienced no issues with getting crews down there. I don't think it was around the same time that trucks were heading to Florida for Puerto Rico. So a lot of the notices that I know, Chris, you worked with Tom on getting out notices from the All Hazards Consortium Fleet Movement Working Group, that helped tremendously, making states aware that there was bucket trucks coming through their states, and to be aware of the response situation. I know we had, for Puerto Rico, we had Sacramento Municipal Utility District wanted to go to Puerto Rico, and they had to go to Lake Charles, Louisiana to catch a barge, and they were going to lowboy their trucks rather than driving them, reducing the wear and tear. And that was like New Year's Day weekend. And there were concerns, the lowboy company expressed concerns about time of service waiver issues. And Tom and yourself, Chris, were very helpful in getting clarification on that, making sure there were no issues. So, I mean, we had no issues this year. Mike?
We spent the holidays together, mostly on conference calls. I mean, Mike, most of the people on the panel, I mean, we were on daily calls, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and I recall that one particular issue that you raised up, and I'm glad that we were able to be responsive and help out in that situation. I know it was one or a couple of trucks, but it made a difference, I think. So,
as far as our, can you hear me? Okay. As far as our industry response, coordinating with the Fleet Response Working Group went seamless. Like Sam was mentioning, we had move a lot of fleet vehicles from as far away as Colorado, Wisconsin, down to the Florida ports, down to Virginia, Lake Charles. Very seamless with the Fleet Response Working Group. A lot of the state waivers were already in place. The other ones that we needed was just a phone call away. Really, the big learning for us as an industry was this is really the first time we ever had to encounter transporting vehicles across the open ocean. So once we got the okay to go there, immediately put a logistics team in place to start working through all the barging issues. Definitely one of these opportunities we're going to take a step back at and look at. Obviously, there's learnings going forward from our industry, what we could do better next time when we have to barge fleet vehicles across the open ocean. A lot of logistic challenges, things that we never thought about is when you get to the port, are there ramps there to drive your trucks on? When you get down to Puerto Rico, were there ramps there to get your truck off? If there weren't ramps, where do you have to arrange for cranes? So these are all things that we were actually learning as we were going through the motions of getting the vehicles there. So obviously a lesson learned coming out of this is we really need to create some type of playbook, reference document, checklist, something to document all these lessons learned we had going forward on if we ever have to encounter transporting vehicles across the open ocean. How do you protect the vehicles from saltwater? We were talking to Altec a couple of weeks ago, and they said they might have like this spray when they ship vehicles over. Well, it would have been nice to know that before the vehicles got there. But how do you protect the vehicles from saltwater? Some of the companies shrink wrap basically their trucks to keep the saltwater away. When we got down to Puerto Rico, lesson learned was we had to wash the trucks before and after they got off the barge. So all these things we were learning along the way. Countless conference calls between, I'm going to say, December 16th until February 7th, or January 7th when our first fleet got down there. But lessons learned, partnering up with a sea agent to work through all the tax issues to get your vehicles down there. A lot of lessons learned coming out of this, and we're going to take a deep dive, once everybody's back home and settled, and take a deep dive and develop some type of playbook going forward. And, we're going to be partnering up with Tom and the Fleet Response Working Group. I think this will be a nice addition to all our playbooks that we have around sea voyage and barging.
I want to stay on Puerto Rico for a couple more minutes, but then I do want to get back to the mainland. Let's transport ourselves back to the mainland eventually. So first, Mike, could you give the group here a little bit more background? This is Mike Zappone or Mike Mangas. Mike just woke up. Both Mikes, a little bit more background on the incident management team, the structure that was put in place, a little bit of more history for the group on kind of how did the trades get involved and coordinate our members' involvement in Puerto Rico. I think probably we should have talked about that first before we talked about sending trucks over there. Well, who was there to receive those trucks? What was the process and structure that was in place down there? How long did it take? When did it all start coming to fruition? That type of thing. And then I'm going to then have a question for you, Ken, on kind of your sector's response to the mainland Harvey and Irma events. But let's start a little bit with a little bit more background on Puerto Rico, kind of the structure that was put in place, how long it took, and I think you guys could probably and Sam, you were along for the ride as well, so you guys can all tag team this, I think.
Okay, so Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico September 20th, 215 days ago, I believe we were at 215 or 13. If anybody could do the math, it's either 213 or 15. But anyways, it was really, it all started October 31st when we got a letter from the head of PREPA and the governor requesting industry support. And the letter was really to EEI, APPA, and the NRECA looking for our help. So that was the really first official request that we got on October 31st to go down to Puerto Rico to assist. We weren't really sure what we were going to get into. We're utility companies. We know how to restore customers, but this was a unique situation where 89% of the transmission system was damaged. I don't think there's one company here on the mainland who has ever experienced 89% of the transmission system damaged. Over 80% of the distribution system was damaged. These are unprecedented numbers for our industry. 100% of generation was lost on day one. Once again, unprecedented damage down there in Puerto Rico. First thing we did was we decided we needed to send, as an industry together, the three trades working together, what we call some power restoration coordinators to get down on the island and start doing an assessment of what was needed down there before we even started thinking about bringing troops down there and crews down there. So November 3rd, Carlos Torres, who is just recently retired one day prior to that, from Con Ed, and Mandy Miranda, Senior Vice President at Florida Power and Light, headed down to Puerto Rico to start doing an assessment. A couple days after that, a management team of 5 individuals arrived on the island to assist them with the assessment and to find out how, as an industry, we can help. The last thing we wanted to do was flood Puerto Rico with 1,000+ resources and not have them being productive. That would have been no benefit to the people of Puerto Rico, and it wouldn't have been any benefit to our crews going down there. Shortly after that, we identified that although there was command structure down there, there really wasn't a strong, unified command between all the different associations and agencies that were down in Puerto Rico. This, like I said, the storm was unprecedented, where you had FEMA, the Army Corps, you had PREPA, you had the governor's appointed representative, who was the GAR, and you had the 3 trade associations all down on the island. 7 different organizations that somehow had to find a way to come together, unite, to restore the people of Puerto Rico. So that was the first challenge of putting together a unified command structure. So November 23rd last year, does anybody know what day that was? I do. It was Thanksgiving Day, and November 23rd, the FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, PREPA, EEI, the other trade associations, we all got together, Sheridan, and we structured out what was going to be the unified command structure going forward to restore the people of Puerto Rico. Very key to put this structure in place. That structure allowed us to then bring in our incident management teams to help support PREPA with the restoration. Once we got our incident management teams, PREPA was divided into 7 regions, and we really felt that we needed to get some regional incident management teams down into Puerto Rico and embed them with PREPA to start bringing some organizational structure together. That was put in place on December 8th. Now we had the framework and the organizational structure to restore effectively the people of Puerto Rico. And then shortly after that is when we began the effort of bringing all of our resources down there. Basically, the structure we put in together was a unified command structure. Carlos Torres was named as a power restoration coordinator. And basically, he shared unified command with Asha Tribble, who was the head of FEMA down there at the JFO. Colonel Lloyd, who was the head of the Army Corps, and then Justo Gonzalez, who was the head of PREPA at the time. Those 4 shared the unified command. And then basically underneath that, we just built your standard traditional ICS structure with incident management teams at the regional level.
Mike, do you have anything to add on maybe your role down there with under that incident management structure, that unified command structure, kind of the logistics issues that you were dealing with?
Yeah, just to support Mike, who did a great job with the timeline. Part of the challenge was taking that unified command and pushing it down to where the boots were on the ground, which can be a real challenge because we all know it is very easy for 4 or several leaders to get together and say, yes, I agree with you, that's the right thing to do, and let's go forward. But do they all communicate effectively downward in their organizations to get everybody on board? Does everybody know the plan and how we're all going to work together? So the real challenge was taking those leadership concepts and bringing them down to where the boots were on the ground, down into the regional levels. So what we did was I was the planning section chief. So what I did was I took the planning section people from each of the 7 regions, and we got together for weekly meetings. It started out as daily phone calls. Once the plan was put in place, it got down to weekly meetings. So I think what we did was to expand on the unified command role. We took that same incident command structure and brought it down to where boots were on the ground so that people from the Army Corps, people from FEMA, which were pretty much liaison type roles, their contractors that were under agreement, the actual IOU or APPA or NRACA line resources and their leadership were all at the table on a weekly basis working off a common playbook. So what we created was consistency based on the leadership strategy, knowing that each of the 7 regions had their own unique challenges, whether it be swamps, marshes, rainforests, mountains, you name it. The challenges are in Puerto Rico, I can tell you. But taking those strategies and making sure that the incident command structure and communication structure stayed intact down at the at ground zero level. So that's how we eventually gained control over how we were going to get this restoration done.
Right. And I think today we're probably north of 97, 98% of all customers who can receive power are restored on Puerto Rico. So you hear about 40 to 50,000 customers still without power. There's lots of customers, and I accentuated who can receive power because there are some structures that just were destroyed beyond repair that could not restore power. So the metric we went with was those customers who could receive power were around 97, 98%. That last couple percentage of restoration is always the hardest. So we've been kind of stuck in that 95, 96, 97% for a couple weeks now. But there's still people down on the island. PREPA is still working on those customers and just keep plugging forward. In fact, Carlos Torres, the power restoration coordinator, was supposed to leave 4 days ago, I believe, and he's staying on through the month of May. Mike, you're going down. Mike Mangus is going back down today, tomorrow, and then Gail Gail Royster is also going to go down on Sunday to handle the next tsunami, and the next tsunami is the tsunami of invoices that our members will be sending to PREPA and FEMA to get fulfilled, because though this was an effort, a humanitarian effort, there's still a lot of cost, obviously, real cost that needs to be taken care of, not for profit. Again, this is not something that our mutual aid networks do to make money. It's to cover costs. So we're in that phase right now down in Puerto Rico. So I'm going to bring us back to the mainland, but I wanted to just point out some metric on the logistics and the getting these trucks over to Puerto Rico. So we were talking, I think, 26 different barges, 27 barges, something like that. How many trucks per barge usually? 50 to 60? I'm not sure.
It ranged.
Yeah.
It ranged on the barges, so anywhere from 50. I think the most we had on was about 100.
Okay, so 26 barges. You can do the math, but I think the number turned out to about 1,000 trucks from APPA's members, NRECA members, and EEI members were down there. And I think we're going to show a video at the end of this panel, 2 videos actually, and you'll get a sense of the scale and scope of that, of bringing those barges down. And before we even got to the reports, there was a lot of work that, again, the All Hazards Consortium, the Fleet Response Working Group had to do and help our industry with in partnership to make that happen a lot smoother than we could have done without them. Okay, now we're going back to the mainland. Ken, a little bit more on Verizon's role during Harvey and Irma. And did you see some of the benefits also from Fleet Response Working Group in those efforts?
Well, probably one of the things that we took benefit from was the flow of information. And instead of having to go out and do a lot of research and track things at a state-by-state level, was being able to go to a single location and pull all that in one shot. For our emergency operations center, great time saver and a great ability to continue to pull in information and share it across our organization in a very efficient and effective way. When there's so much going on, those things add up very quickly and was very helpful. So I think that's probably the biggest one from the work done by this organization. We are fortunate in the fact that we are relatively resource rich in the states impacted by the hurricanes, and didn't have to do a lot of our own fleet movement. A little bit deploying some of our emergency response teams and some of our mobile assets that we use to support first our own response, and then very quickly public sector support, and then also community support. But I think that's probably the right summary.
Great. Sam, I'm going to put you on the spot here. We've talked about how the coordination and collaboration between the private sector and the public sector has really improved over the last couple of years. You spoke of that federal government coordination. We heard other panelists talking about the state government coordination with our industry. A lot of people think that, every utility is the same. I mentioned we represent the investor-owned utilities. Sam represents public power. We don't agree on a lot of issues that are outside of this space. When it comes to emergencies and events like this, I think we come together as the various trade associations and the members that we represent. But, there's a lot of issues around tax and finance and other things that, we're not always in step with, which is fine, because you represent a certain business model, we represent a certain business model. But at the end of the day, when it comes to power restoration, we're all on the same team, right? So how has that, in your mind, improved that coordination between not only the 2 trade associations or the 3 trade associations that represent the industry, but also the members on the ground? So you represent public power in, for example, Florida. We have members in Florida Power and Light, Duke Energy, TECO, Tampa Electric. How have we seen some evidence of that coordination improved over the last few years? And I think you also bring a unique perspective because you work for a utility, one of the ones I mentioned, in fact. So what are your thoughts on that, the coordination?
So the the interesting thing about the coordination is it was okay pre-2016, but due to some issues in particular in Florida with Hermione, however you want to call her, Governor Rick Scott directed the electric utilities, investor-owned, municipal or public power and cooperative, to sign a cross-segment agreement to support each other. And I know the municipal, the public power, and the investor-owned have. I don't think the cooperatives have, but that really encouraged the utilities to support each other, for the public power and IOUs to support each other. Same thing in New York State. Governor Andrew Cuomo did the same thing. There's a agreement amongst all utilities in the state. They're all signatories, and that is working well, especially with the nor'easters recently. Was there 4 or so?
I lost count.
Yeah, 3 or 4. Our utilities were, most of them are in the upstate area of New York, and a lot of them came down to Putnam, Westchester County to help, and Orange County to help Con Ed and Orange and Rockland. So that has definitely been helpful. Our members are unique in that we have statistics show that public power utilities have more linemen per customer than investor-owned and co-ops, and that the reason for that is more of a condensed space, right? So city utilities, smaller, some of them, and more compact. It's also harder to get rid of government employees, whether federal, city, state, right? So that's another reason for having more linemen per meter. So for that reason, a lot of the times our members are requested by investor-owned utilities, and quickly go help as soon as they're done with their own local service area. It's been our members were actively helping Florida Power and Light and Duke Energy in Florida, and I know vice versa. Florida Power and Light was key, especially providing drone support to the Keys Energy, which is our member, and doing a damage assessment, and as well as providing materials. I think transformers. There were a couple hundred pole mount transformers. Yeah, Southern Company, I think, provided that. So really, it's great collaboration. So I know Chris talked about EEI's regional mutual assistance groups. Our members, particularly the larger ones on the West Coast and the Western RMAG and Texas. So our members are actually members of those groups in those areas. So I think the coordination in the Western states, particularly California, Washington, Oregon, and Arizona, and then in Texas is, at a higher level because they're part of the RMAG, and great collaboration and coordination. I think as you move further out west, there's a little less distinction of, oh, you're an IOU, oh, you're a municipal or public power, or you're a co-op. That mindset isn't really there as much as it may still be on the East Coast. At the trade level, I think since Sandy, things have tremendously gotten better as far as our collaboration. Yeah, there are a lot of issues we don't agree on, but cyber, physical security, and disaster response mutual aid, which are the things that matter, the things that keep the customers with electricity so they can turn their lights on, are the things we agree on, and we work very closely together, as well as with the federal government. We are at the trade level. We are working on a MOU to kind of solidify that collaboration into a document and signing across the trades. That's in the progress right now. We're working together on that to the co-ops, public power, and IOUs sign a MOU saying we will continue to work together.
Great.
Well, I think we're getting, I don't have a green light yet. There's my green light. Okay. So I think we're getting close to the end of the panel session. I do want to open it up to the audience for questions from, I'll call you distinguished now because you did such a great job. So our distinguished panelists. And then we're going to show a couple-minute video from Sam's organization, APPA, and then a couple-minute video from EEI on the restoration efforts in Puerto Rico. And you'll see from those videos that, why we do what we do, why we answered the call when that letter came from PREPA and the governor in October of 2017. But so we'll go with some questions first, and then we will have Tom. Hopefully, he has some more technical skills than the rest of us do, and he'll get the video. He'll get the video queued up. Any questions? Got one in the back. Get you next, and please say who you are, who you represent, and then fire away.
Hi, thanks. This is a great panel. I'm Bob Downs, and I'm from CEAS, the Center for International Earth Science Information Network at Columbia University, and we operate the NASA Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, known as CDAC, and we're part of the ESIP Federation. And so, seeing that there were lots of coordination and lessons from the Puerto Rico experience, I'm wondering if, as a result, the people who are actually in Puerto Rico are now part of these different coordination efforts that we have here, such as even the Fleet Response Working Group, et cetera. And then also related to that, in terms of such coordination, if something was to happen again, I guess since a lot has been put in place with backups, it wouldn't be 89% loss or what have you. But certainly they are vulnerable there, and given that, is there the potential for them to get the data they need through these coordinations in the event of the next disaster? Thanks.
So who would like to take that softball? Anyone?
I'll respond to the first question about Puerto Rico being involved in kind of the mutual aid groups. Puerto Rico has actually been a signatory on APPA's mutual aid network for 18 years. So they've been involved in our mutual aid network. This round the request came a bit late, but actually the New York Power Authority went down a day after the storm to assist. I think one thing to keep in mind is mutual aid requesting assistance is voluntary, responding is voluntary. So, we at the trade levels can't direct utilities to assist utilities. We have to rely on the utilities to make the best decision. We at the trade level collaborate closely and encourage, if that's politically correct, encourage our members to respond.
Comments on the data issue?
I think there's opportunities for having PREPA involved in the All Hazards Consortium, this forum, and other data sharing forums. They're under. They just had a new CEO, executive director, start a couple weeks ago, who's very open to learning the lessons of the 2017 season, and has shown to be very interested in what we're doing. So I think working with the All Hazards Consortium and the data sharing is a good opportunity.
So one thing, I think we've been so involved in Puerto Rico that we tend to forget some of the details, and we kind of take it for granted that everyone else knows this. But I think a challenging point around the Puerto Rico restoration was the island was bankrupt and the utility was bankrupt. So not only are you trying to help a company that needs your help, and it's voluntary, as Sam said, but there was an issue with, okay, do they have the funds to support this? Now, we didn't let that get in our way. We worked through that. We worked on ways to get through that. But I didn't want anyone to not to lose sight of that, the fact that not only was it unique because it was an island, getting the resources over there, but the financial situation on the island and with the utility was very, very unique from that perspective.
And comms played an issue early on.
I'm Jim Morentz from SABRE, the Single Automated Business Exchange for Reporting, and really good discussion. I was struck as you laid out the timeline, which started at event and request and setting up ICS and eventually delivering resources, that those were associated with September, October, November, December, January. Things that I assume in Harvey or any of the other ones were days rather than months. What could have sped things up to be effectively more responsive to everyone or deliver the results faster that you all wanted to do? What could have sped things up?
I'll jump in real quick because any lessons learned that you're going to hear from the panel, we would treat as preliminary at this point. It's kind of observations. We're going to do a full after-action report with the Department of Energy very soon. In fact, I think DOE already started working on it. But so anything that they bring to the table is probably their observation. There's probably some truth in it, but I wouldn't put it down as gospel at this point. But great question. So go ahead, guys.
Yeah, and I'll just comment to that. So you got to remember, and Sam hit it earlier, was September 20th, the storm hit Puerto Rico. That doesn't mean that there were things that weren't being done. So EEI, APPA were actively engaged with trying to help in this situation. We were having NREC, national executive calls, national response executive calls early in the stage, trying to figure out, can we get contractors down there to help? Remember that, like Chris mentioned, Puerto Rico was bankrupt, so FEMA came in. So FEMA was basically the gatekeeper of all the finances and the approvals to come down there. So without the appropriate funding to go down there, we kind of had our hands tied. We couldn't really do too much until October 31st, when the official request came in from the governor. Even though the governor requested our services, we could go down there, but Puerto Rico was bankrupt. So we still had to rely on FEMA approval to get our crews down there. So a lot of the time was spent doing cost estimates for what our resources would cost to go there. This is completely new to our organization. Our mutual assistance agreements are pretty much signed between utility and utility, recognizing that if I come help one utility, I'm going to get reimbursed. Here we are dealing with FEMA. Probably the first time in our history that our industry had to work with FEMA. So obviously there's probably going to be some lessons learned on how can we improve that relationship with FEMA going forward. Barging, logistics, all new challenges. Not saying we could have did it faster. There's always opportunities to learn, and I'm sure we're going to learn out of this as we do our lessons learned. So yeah, there are things along the way that we're probably going to learn that we could probably do better next time. And like I said early, one thing about this industry is we use every event as a learning opportunity to get better. So, there are things that we could do, and we'll learn from those.
I would like to add, thanks, Mike, great points. I would like to add that I think the way it was done, by setting up the incident management teams and taking the organized approach that was taken by industry, you would not have seen it, you would not see us at above 97% right now. If we had just flooded the island with line workers, and we wouldn't have resources. I mean, we had resource constraints anyway. So, yeah, I think the way it was done. Now, yes, it could have been quicker. I think there could have been a lot of things, and like Mike said, we'll have a lot of lessons learned. But I think the way the incident management teams were stood up was a testament of how well ICS can be used in the electric utility industry.
A little anecdote, I'll just speak my phone. Carlos Torres, who's the power restoration coordinator down in Puerto Rico, he likes to use the analogy that if you have 10 mechanics working on an engine, that doesn't mean that the engine's going to get fixed any faster because you've got almost too many cooks in the kitchen. And that gets to Stan's point about, we had to make sure that the situation situation on the ground was ready to accept the amount of resources that could make the situation better versus just flooding it with anybody and everybody. So.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into my question. My name is Derek Rule. I'm the emergency representative for the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, and so I'm fairly new at the PUC. But we're starting to do planning at the state level for black sky events. And Puerto Rico is certainly a black sky event, right, where you couldn't even talk to each other. So how did you establish initial operational communications on the first week to establish that unified command?
There was no communications the first week. I mean, it was, I think PREPA may have had one satellite phone, but they had trouble with that even. Requires line of sight, etc. It really took for New York Power Authority. Governor Cuomo said, Governor Cuomo said, I'm going to send the New York Power Authority down to see what's going on in Puerto Rico and help. And that's how we got a lot of our information, is from the New York Power Authority, who were strangers to the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. They, not necessarily worked together in the past. So you had New York Power Authority, 12 people going down there, inserting themselves in Puerto Rico's command center and war room, trying to relay information back. So that was really this was FEMA at this point in time. We're talking a day or two after. I don't recall FEMA being involved at that point in the communications discussions. We had somebody embedded at the NRCC and kind of relaying information that way.
Let me throw out a couple of thoughts on communications for Puerto Rico. We didn't have a lot of direct engagement there because we don't have a lot of network assets on the island. Most of our wireless arrangements are through roaming agreements with the local service providers. But, a couple of thoughts. One, we did have one fixed wireline site there. The importance of backup power is incredibly important. Ran that site on generator and battery for 60 days. Great partnership with some of our some of the local vendors who provided fuel. And then you have to think about your secondary service requirements as well. A lot of that kind of maintenance we will perform for ourselves, but some of it we need people with different certifications or what have you, and having those folks come in and be able to work on our generator also very important. And a great partnership down there to sustain that site for 60 days. We did put a liaison on the ground to help with improving communications down there, and really a private-to-private effort by making new roaming agreements with some of the local service providers, and then pushing out to all of our customers the ability to roam onto their networks, so that when there was limited resources available that were working, if it was working, you would be able to get onto it. So that's one thing we did to help with communications. And this one's a little less directly for the response, but one of our large retail commercial customers uses our satellite solution for their backup, for their landline data transfers. Obviously, always very helpful for a response when the population can go to the store and purchase, critical supplies. So we actually put one of our engineers on their plane to go down there the day after, and they literally went site to site over the next 3 days, and in those 3 days got 28, I think, of the 31 locations they had on the island
back up and running so that they could, support sales to their customers. Great partnership there as well, but it does illustrate the need to have multiple modes of communication, wireline, wireless, and for true emergency satellite solutions in a mix so that you can sustain those kind of critical communications. A little less direct to your question about response, but I think it adds some context to what was going on at the time.
Okay, we have 3 more questions, and then we're going to show the videos, and we're going to let you take a little bit of break. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. Yeah, Jeff Turco, FEMA Logistics. So, 1,000 trucks, 26 ships and barges, movement kind of went okay to get over there. I mean, where did we, the federal government, FEMA, Movement Control Center, and I remember, Jermaine, thorny issues, you to make a distraction, I run away, you jump on the grenade. Yeah, so where did we get in the way? Where were we not helpful? Where did we not enable movement? Where did we cause problems?
Okay, so I think
Vegas rule.
Yeah,
Vegas rule, right?
we didn't early on before pre-landfall of Irma on the U.S. Virgin Islands. We were in contact with DOE ESF 12, our sector-specific agency, talking about how to potentially get crews down to the Virgin Islands, and our immediate response was, well, in the past, at least 2 separate times in the past 20 years, crews and trucks have been flown by military aircraft to the Virgin Islands. We found out that that may not be an option. So we were okay, so what are our options? And that was kind of a, nobody really knew what the options were. When we found that out, we worked with DOE and FEMA, and FEMA did support getting a barge of some trucks down to the U.S. Virgin Islands, but about midway through the deployment, handed it off to the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority and said, you guys are responsible for barging the rest of your crews from the mainland and back. This was kind of a curveball because they had not ever done that before. They had never been responsible for barge transportation of crews before. They didn't have pre-existing contracts. They weren't familiar with all the requirements of securing barges and advising the responding utilities of the power of attorney from the form that needs to be filled out, the customs requirements, USDA requirements, etc. That was kind of a trial by fire, if you will. So I think we need to, as part of the lessons learned, need to figure out, okay, if flying trucks by aircraft is, because it's not financially, advantageous. The taxpayer money goes down the drain really quickly, and you only get four trucks, I think, on an aircraft. But we need to discuss, what are the options? Is there a strike team that can be flown first, and then the rest go by barge? So I think as part of the lessons learned after actions, that's some of the things we need to discuss.
For me, from an operations standpoint, I don't like to use the terminology that FEMA got in the way or anything like that, because I can tell you firsthand, were it not for the horsepower of some of the FEMA logistics people on that island, things would have been much worse, because they did muster the resources and the manpower and the logistics to fly things in on Christmas Day that were vitally needed. I mean, to the point where they were, I don't even know if I should say, well, anyway, we somehow got into an airport hangar somewhere, and we got a hold of what we needed and got it flown to the island the following day. So please don't, let me start out by saying, FEMA Logistics really was a great partner to have. However, one of the challenges that FEMA did have, unfortunately, was following the law. And you have certain policies that require you to, let's say, get 3 bids on something prior to being able to purchase and provide. Sometimes that going out to bid process, which is a requirement. We finally got the understanding of that. Sometimes that going out to bid process did cause some delays in the procurement and shipment and receiving of some materials. So, again, it's not a criticism. It's FEMA following their policies that in some instances cause some delays in getting a hold of stuff. And yeah, no, and again, for as many times as we had problems finding things and shipping them, FEMA came through. FEMA Logistics came through on a number of big occasions for us. If I had to provide you with something, it would be the fact that you followed your policy. And that's there, by no means is that being critical, but it was that policy that at times prohibited, expediting. Which, and I don't know, Mike, did I say that? Okay,
Yeah, I'm just going to echo, it wasn't necessarily FEMA. The Army Corps was given the mission to go ahead and procure the materials. So I think it was really, and this is all going to come out in the lessons learned, but with the Army Corps had that requirement, as Mike was saying, to go out and solicit 3 bids. They're going to investor-owned utilities. We're not suppliers. We have the material. We just want to ship it there. But we had to go through this process of submitting 3 bids to get it awarded in order for us to go ahead and ship the material down. As far as our involvement in getting the fleet down there to Puerto Rico, one of the things that we came under an MOU with PREPA. So we weren't contracted through the Army Corps. Had we been contracted through the Army Corps, we would have had different avenues under Army Corps Logistics to get vehicles down there. Because we came down through an MOU with PREPA, we were basically on our own to go get our own logistics. So that was a slowdown. Here we're investor-owned utilities. We're not in the barging business, so it was a learning curve. Had we been able to come potentially under the Army Corps vertical down there, there might have been opportunities to speed up the process. And this is all going to be stuff that's going to probably come out in the lessons learned. How can we do it better next time?
Hey, Dave Polineski, FEMA Region 3. I was down in Puerto Rico, and one of the lessons I learned was about critical information. I was on the fuel team, and one of the things we tracked in our naivete was power generation. And as that number went up, we would get really, really excited because we thought as that number went up, less generators, less fuel, and we shut down and head home. Then somebody came over from DOE and said, power generation has nothing to do with who's actually getting power and where it's going. So the takeaway lesson I learned from that is, what critical information do you think we need as FEMA to be able to make correct decisions, timely decisions? Where would I get that information from? Who provides it so that we can correctly employ our emergency power resources in a timely fashion?
I'll take a shot at it. And this is not for FEMA only. This is for all of us. My recommendation to everyone, including myself, is you have to have strong, talented, and committed liaisons. Your liaison game's got to be strong. And sometimes I think people put liaisons in place and don't properly tool them to be as effective as they can be. So if take a good look at your liaison program. I can tell you, I'll throw a name out there. His name is Scott Erickson. I'd hug that guy right now if he was here. But in all honesty, a great liaison when it came to getting things done. So, and again, that's for any private, any public sector organization. Your liaison program is the key to making the unified command organization and system work. So if you're investing in your liaisons, I commend you. Properly train them and tool them, and I think you'll see success in many areas of communication, and not only I'll call it two-way communication.
Let me build on that just a little bit, and that's very similar to a lesson we've learned through both, the winter storms recently and the summer storms in the fall, is the importance of expanding the team. And we have a great core of professional business continuity people who are, working on these issues 24/7. But during a major event, it's not enough. And during an extended event or a series of events like we saw both this fall and this winter, is really not enough. And so you have to expand your team and look at the larger organization and identify people who can help you out when you need those additional resources. And that's not just finding them, but making sure that they are trained and understand the role they are going to play and the difference between that role and their normal role. And I'll use two quick examples. Sometimes in state EOCs, we will use our government relations folks. They're not there to talk policy. And sometimes we use our account teams that work with the state agencies. They're not there to sell services. They're there to act as liaisons. And when you help them understand that role and train them how to fill that role, they are great partners, and they will greatly expand the capability of your organization to respond to a major emergency or to a extended series of emergencies.
With specific information regarding electricity generation and the status of the electricity sector in an impacted area, DOE does really great sit reps, and they started doing 2 a day, I believe, early on with Harvey, and then they just continued on. And I think the page that they had on DOE's website started off as Harvey, then it was Irma, then it was Maria, then it was Nate, then it was back to just the 3. I highly recommend linking with the ICER group, soon to be the Caesar group at DOE. Matt Duncan would be a great resource to link up to and to have that insight into the electricity sector in the impacted area.
Great. Last question, and then we're going to go to the entertainment.
Okay, so I'm the last question. Jim Salmon, Holland Power Services. I'll try to frame this as quickly as I can. A lot of state offices of emergency management have incident response teams that they send into the major disasters to kind of frame the response. Utilities have their incident response teams where we do that on a regular basis, and in some cases, they'll go into multiple areas. What was created for Puerto Rico, unique in many ways, however, probably something there's going to be a need for in the future also. So although I think a lot of what was put together for the IRT was kind of ad hoc, are there plans to take that public-private partnership and create that structure so that you're available to send in the incident command system, section chiefs, et cetera, to assist at a natural response event or other similar disaster to Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I think going forward, can you hear me? Oh. I think coming out of the lessons learned, that is going to be something we're going to have to take a look at is, how far do we want to document the structure and everything that we put in place? I don't want to say we would probably never stand up this organization again because you never know. But yeah, going forward, I'm assuming there's probably going to be one of the things that are going to come out of the lessons learned, as well as what kind of framework we are going to put together. Sam touched upon a MOU between the 3 trades that we're working on right now to basically develop an MOU. So if we do have an event like this going forward, there's already a pre-existing agreement that the 3 trades will work together. We're looking to build a library of standard MOU templates that companies can engage with to speed up the restoration, so we don't have to get a whole bunch of lawyers involved to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So we're going to do, that's already in process to start getting that framework in place for the next event.
Great. So again, we're going to move to the videos. First, let me take a moment to thank the panel. That was a great discussion. We're all over the map, literally from the mainland to Puerto Rico to the Virgin Islands, but I think we pulled some good information out of that discussion. So please, a round of applause for them. Now, Sam, I did want to give you an opportunity to tee up your video, just to, if there's any background you want to provide for it, and then I'll say that the second video is something EEI put together, and it's footage on the ground from the restoration, our various companies that we're working under the power restoration coordinator, some high-level statistics, and hopefully it'll touch your heart as well, and you'll feel good about what you guys do on a daily basis, and also what the four gentlemen up here participated in as well. So, Sam, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. So what I did was combine two separate videos. The first one that you'll see is from Santee Cooper, which is the public power electric utility in South Carolina. They have the Charleston area and surrounding suburbs. They're actually a state entity. This is the video of their response to the Virgin Islands. And then the second video is from SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District out in California, and it's a video of their response to California. So enjoy.
One second. I was here for Hugo. I was 19 years when Hugo passed. Hugo took my roof. Maria took my roof, and Hugo took my roof. It's been 2 months they've been without power. So 2 months, and we've been doing our best to get them back on. It's a crazy feeling knowing that when you're back home, you're living your life the way you normally live it, and then over here it's like they don't have power. Everything's gone.
Ever since then, we've been rebuilding, we've been, enlisting the help of other utilities from the state side. And, of course, we had contracts in place to bring some contractors down, but it wasn't nearly enough. You can't expect or prepare for having 2 Cat 5s in 1 year in the same month.
It was just the greatest feeling ever. They would come running outside, hugging our neck, hugging us. It was just the greatest feeling ever. So, and I think that's the biggest reason why we do this. It's not for the money. It's not for that. It's just to make people's lives a little bit better than what it was yesterday.
For SMUD, community is really at the heart of all we do. It was hard not to go to Puerto Rico based on that. It was a humanitarian crisis. It's something we absolutely needed to do. We had staff in Puerto Rico for more than 2 months.
The devastation was widespread. I mean, it hit right in the middle of the island, so everywhere you looked, it was bad. And we showed up 6 months after it happened, so the amount of devastation that was still present was, it was a little mind-boggling.
Our crews had an amazing impact on the people of Puerto Rico. They did it with such heart because they knew that they were making a difference in these people's lives. And when you stop and think about it, it is as much about restoring hope as it is restoring power.
Seeing how they dealt with with the hand that they were given, and just dealing without power for 6 months, but still having to live life, get up, go to work, hot water cooking, things that you take for granted, they just made do. It was eye-opening.
You genuinely met people that were so grateful. You can't put into words how grateful they were just to have something that we do every day, something we take for granted here. We do something simple for somebody, and it's life-changing for them.
I felt incredible pride watching them work. The response from the people in Puerto Rico to our crews was so heartwarming. These are folks who had been out of power for 6 months, something we can't even imagine. And to see the reaction of the neighbors when our crews drove up, the joy and the hope in their faces was really, really remarkable.
Great video.
going to be energizing about 25 to 30 houses here this morning. The feed comes around from behind these houses, goes back over to here. We're going to pick up about 5 or 6 houses down this alley here, and about 5 or 6 that way, and feeding back to the east. So my guess is probably about 25 to 30 houses that will be energizing, getting people back in. Power here probably within an hour.
Say thanks from the bottom of my heart, and I'm so happy because I got the power in my house, so I can do my stuff in my house, the washing machine, the refrigerator, seeing TV. That I know it's not easy. I don't speak too much English, but thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. Love you guys. God bless you.
Today we're running services to these customers who have been out of power since Hurricane Irma. They've been 5 months now without power.
Well, every day is like a fight. And I am worried because I have a little kid like 5 years old.
We're working in the Coriel area of Puerto Rico. We have 8 crews and approximately 37 line workers. I want them to know we're working hard. People of Puerto Rico, they've been so patient and so resilient, but I want them to know we're giving our best to restore power as quickly and safely as we can.
And then give us some hope that it's going to be more better every day.
See the hurricane approaching the island, you see how massive it was. I believe it was bigger than Florida. At the beginning, we couldn't communicate. It took like a day or two to hear from my sister. It was very scary. I never, in my wildest dream, thought I'd be here. And then they asked me to come, and I still didn't know where I was going to be. And then they said, bye, I'm home. And then it happened to be right in the area where I grew up. It's just a great feeling to be able to be helping these people out because the island is devastated, and they need help. Right now, they're putting 3 service poles. They're going to run the wires to these houses here from that transformer that's in the back over there. They're going to light up about 15 or 20 houses that are in a pocket that was expected no sooner than June. So luckily we were able to come and get them all lit up. This morning the guys were loading the poles and they all knew it was for my sister. And to me, it's beyond any words I can express. I'm grateful to all the guys, to FPL for letting me come down and help my family.
With Noel, it was a matter of just giving back to him what he gives back to us. This is our chance to give him what he has given us.
Knowing that my brother and his co-workers are here, we're very happy to have you all here.
Whatever you do in life, you gotta leave the place better than you found it, and that's exactly what we're doing here.
Difícil, bastante difícil. Sobre todo los encamados que necesitaban la energía, pues el calor, eso fue lo más que le afectó a ellos, el calor.
This is a retirement home that we just got power to. It's been a real challenging situation. We really have to coordinate and plan this job. This job is challenging because there's only one way in and one way out. You have to coordinate with them because they have patients that come in and out. Just some area was overgrown with bamboo. And in order to service the nursing home at the top of the hill, we'd have to make different kinds of tree trimming up here.
As an industry, we want to support and bring as many customers as we can. We're going to be here till we bring the majority of the customers back. you know, we're going to see that we're going to have about, you know, over 5,500 total resources working to restore power to the island.
The people here today, just helping them get the power back in this building, we know it's something that's a real necessity for them, and it feels great.
Súper contenta, súper feliz. Ellos también, eso va a ser una gran noticia para ellos.
Okay, we're going to start our lightning round. First up is Florida Power and Light, Eric Schwartz. Florida Power and Light was using drones during several of these storms. Okay, Eric, you're on. Just make sure you hold this close to your mouth so they can hear you on the website.
Yep. So, can everyone hear me okay? My name's Eric Schwartz. I'm with Florida Power and Light. A little bit about my background. I'm with the Smart Grid Innovation Group, my day job, where I look at technology and innovation that's 5, 10, 15 years out and figure out how to operationalize that using my background in operations and bring a return on investment to the company as a regulated utility. And so today my storm role, though, is I've been the lead for NextEra/FPL on UAS drones for almost 4 years now. And I manage and run that hobby for the company and I call it a hobby because we don't have an organization like Duke or Southern Company or Excel Energy where they have a full-fledged program and funding and so forth. So for IRMA, and you know, to kind of give you a brief background, is 3 years ago when I started this program for the company, we as a storm response and hurricane you know, the emergency preparedness team, we took an approach to where we're not going to have a full-fledged team to be able to support if a Cat 5 came in. And so we started to reach out to the community through RFPs and RFQs on contracts to set up for storm response and blue sky response. So we have about 7 volunteer pilots within the businesses, within NextEra as a whole. We have about 17 UASs. And we have 12 vendors with over 100 pilots that we can call in to do emergency response. And so go back to 2016 for Matthew and Hermine, which was the first time we actually had to use UASs. We brought in about 20-something vendors, and we didn't really know what to expect. And we were able to, within 72 hours, bring them on, have them as a storm rider to where we set them up at Cat 5 hotels at certain staging sites where we logistically thought we would need to have them deploy right after a storm. And they went out and they took pictures and videos, beautiful imagery, but we had no idea what to do with it. It was 4K video, high definition pictures. How are you supposed to get all that imagery back? What are you supposed to look at? What are you supposed to do? And we just kind of sent them on their merry way, and it was a cluster. But it was a great lesson learned. And learning from that, the 16 side of it, coming into IRMA, we then realized that we needed a better phased approach, a better process, and so forth. So what we ended up doing is our new process is every pilot is teamed with a visual observer that's an FPL employee, certified patroller for storm. That way, we don't have to worry about transferring video imagery and pictures in real time with damage, because the patroller right then and there can make the assessment on what needs to be done and what needs to be reported back. And then also we take an approach to where all we care about is poles down, wire down, and vegetation that's an issue in the line or blocking a road. We don't care about anything else on the drone side, because where these drones and the pilots are going and visual observers are to inaccessible locations, areas that are flooded, trees are down, blocking roadways, and so forth, to where we're trying to get an assessment to understand what equipment we need to bring into that edge. So once we can get through there, whether it's a tree down and we get the tree out of the way, we then have the correct equipment on the higher side of CMH poles and wire to be able to get the customers restored and back on as quickly as possible. But on that approach, we then, we had about 6 vendors during 2016. We upped it to 12. And for Irma, we brought in 71 external pilots, teams, to where we brought in 40 ahead of the storm, pre-staged them, 2 teams per staging site, over 20 staging sites. And then as soon as we were able to deploy after the wind speeds died down and it wasn't raining, we were able to then deploy these teams for the first few days to areas that we predetermined ahead of the storm as well. So they didn't need to go to the staging site to find the incident commander, to find the info intelligence chief or so forth, to be able to get orders. They already knew what their marching orders were ahead of time. And that was another issue, or lessons learned, that we learned from the 16 compared to 17 hurricane season. And it was a huge win. Also, another side of it is talking about telling the story. You guys saw the videos. Is from Irma and 16, we learned also on the MNC side to where we gave standalone teams to marketing communications so they could go out and collect imagery and tell the story to give back to the media and to put on social media and Facebook, because as you all know, it's very important to tell how bad it is to the customers so they understand how hard you're working and what we're trying to do and what you're really up against. So going into Irma, we deployed 40 pre-storm, 72 hours ahead of time, standby, brought them into the different staging sites, put them up in Cat 5 hotels and facilities. And then after the storm, we brought in an additional 30 as needed into areas. And then as things moved around, logistically, we moved them around and so forth. We have a standard person, second in command, reports to me, that's at the control center or command center, running logistics, setting up, pre-storm with me, all the hotels, all the travel stuff, and so on. And then from there, setting up how you're going to get the images back, reporting to, and so on. It was a huge win. There's still a lot of lessons learned and improvements on that we're working on. And next week, FPL has our Storm Dry Run Week, which we'll be a part of, and to continue that process and so forth for this hurricane season. Continuous improvement, and, I'd say always trying to, help out the areas as quickly as possible and best as possible. As mentioned earlier as well, we did get a call for mutual assistance down to Keys Electric, which they had a section of transmission line over a 3-mile span over the water that kept on tripping, and they couldn't find the insulator that they thought are the damage, and we were able to help them with UAS doing an inspection during the day and then also at night of all of the insulators and with a thermal vision to see if there was any other tracking issues potentially. And that was a huge success for Keys Electric. We were able to help them find the issue, and they, unfortunately, the next night it tripped again, but we found the location and they switched out the insulator and they were good to go. So it was a huge win on mutual assistance for UASs. It was the first time we've got a call to do that. And of course, we were glad to help out. I got about a minute left. Are we taking questions now, or so any questions? Oh, this is an easy crowd.
How do you share information with the state?
That's a great question. So we don't, like any utility. And it's interesting because you have to understand, as a regulated utility, we got calls from Miami-Dade. Said, hey, if you're up in the air, can you go and take pictures of our roadways and give that to us? Well, the issue is that we're a regulated utility. All of our hours are to our ratepayer customers, and that's not our responsibility, is to take pictures of roadways and so forth. Now, if a picture was able, if we were there to take a picture of a utility or do restoration efforts, after going through MNC and scrubbing to making sure safety, like normal, going out to the community, we have shared some of that information. But if a county or a city called and said, hey, can you go do an inspection for us? unless we have a mutual assistance agreement like we did with Keys Electric, you can't, because of being the regulated utility, as a nice way of saying that.
That's the truth.
Yes.
It would be helpful to have the interoperability three-stage with all the various local jurisdictions, utilities, or first responders. Sorry. That's all right.
Yeah, so that anybody, because the video comes from multiple different sources, yours being one, but it can come from, the transportation cameras, but they may not have power and things like that. So having the ability to have video interoperability during these events.
Oh, it's huge. And so what FP&L does is they have M&C representatives, and I forget the term, but another side on the M&C side that are people that are account reps that sit at the local EOCs for different counties and cities in Tallahassee and so forth. And that's how they do the communication back and forth or share that type of information or requests. So they'll have someone there, an FPL rep, that is the main point of contact as the account rep or so forth for the storm response to help with that communication. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, if we're allowed to, we will share information. But if we were to get a call, as Tom said, hey, could you go help us and take, which we did for Miami-Dade, of I-95, we can't, because of how we're structured and paying and so forth. It's not for the benefit of the ratepayer to get power back on. Now, if it was something where we need to get logistics of transportation, of tracking, vehicles from Naples to so forth, and there was an area that was flooded, then that'd be beneficial, but at the request of a county or so forth. But to answer your question, it'd be huge. And knowledge sharing, and we're very open on sharing information, you benefit both parties or so forth. And so we have people in those different EOCs or different logistics to help with that information.
So Eric, if the Fleet Work Group organizes around drone mutual assistance, would you be interested in helping with that regard as an advisor, Florida Power and Light?
So you have to ask Tom.
Okay.
So because I'm not part of the emergency preparedness group, I'm here to cover for Tom and Ileana. But we spoke 2 weeks ago at Jacksonville, EEI's mutual assistance, and there's going to be some work that EEI is working on to setting that up for a mutual assistance program. EEI's working group, drone working group, is also talking about that. But ideally, with drones and the recommendation and where they're going to put their foot down is that it's going to go through, it's not going to be like a separate cybersecurity mutual assistance. It's going to go through the standard mutual assistance regulatory and so forth. So Chris can talk about that more.
To foot stomp that point, I just want to make sure there's clarity around the term mutual assistance. Because Tom, when I hear you say, hey, Eric, would you like to help us with mutual assistance? I'm hearing between the utilities and the state government agencies, like what's going on with PEMA.
Mm-hmm.
Our mutual assistance is just like line resources,
company to company
sharing those drone resources. And we want to do that within the existing framework of our regional mutual assistance group. So we need to be very careful when we throw the term mutual assistance around, because it means something to you and Jeff Thomas, which might be a little bit different than between me and Eric, or Eric and another.
So that'll become you and Jeff Thomas instead of me. Jeff. Hey, Eric, thank you. I know you got to fly out. I appreciate taking the time to come up from Florida.
And I left some business cards with Tom.
They're on the front podium right there behind you.
So if anyone wants to come grab one, I have to unfortunately catch a flight right now. So, but you can email me with questions or so forth. Even minus the notion about sharing, we are very open to talking. The UAS is a new program and so forth. But if you just ask us to fly, that'd be, another thing. But to share information, to talk about how we've done stuff and how we were able to do stuff for Irma or just regular day blue sky and so forth, we'd be happy to share as much as possible, because it's a new technology, a new innovation, and it's only going to get better and more useful. So,
Eric, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jeff, I'll let you introduce yourself. Eric teed you up perfectly.
There you go.
Disagree? And hold it close. You have to stand still or it'll shock you.
Thanks so much for not making me play with those mics, because I seen Mike and Mike over there and scared the hell out of me. I'm just telling you. Right? I'm Jeff Thomas. I'm the Deputy Director of FEMA. I've been to a number of these meetings over the years. I know Tom for a number of years. I know a lot of folks in this room because I'm old and I've been around for a while. So Tom asked, I'm not going to stand still. I'm not good at that. Tom asked me to talk about two things quickly. I'll try the quickly part. We'll see how that goes. The first really is about a partnership that we started to work on with PP&L before some folks from PP&L just up and left. It was moving along. I think we're going to have to re-energize that with some new people. But the concept is simple, and it's one that we've been working on different other avenues that I think this applies to. So it's a good day in an emergency manager's life when the lights come on. And all of my friends in here that are emergency managers, we want the utilities back in service as fast as we can. We want you back in service. Everyone's using drones today. We have tons of, Pennsylvania's a Commonwealth. 67 counties, 2,600 local units of government, and every one of them has fire departments, a lot of them being volunteers because that's all they can have. Hardworking people, great dedicated first responders, and a whole bunch of them have drones and think they know how to fly them until they don't touch it for 6 months and then fly them into things. That's truth. That's the way it goes. They're not using them every day. They have a tremendous benefit, but it's just not their main source of work. The utilities, on the other hand, PP&L in particular, are getting very good at using drones, not just for what the gentleman from Florida Power and Light talked about, but I'm going to talk about more residential, right? So not your transmission lines, your distribution lines. And they have a need to get into areas that folks that do what I do control. After disasters and after floods and after, re-entry, we control that. That's control at the local level. So the idea is simple. I'm not as worried about the data, quite honestly, because I view this as transitional data. This is data that we want to see, we want to use, we want to make decisions on, but it's really not data that we're going to keep for 7 years. It's really just transitional data, no different than if we sent a crew in to say, where's the most of the flooding? What's the preliminary damage assessment look like from FEMA's eyes? Where are we, right? Where do we think we are on a preliminary basis? It's really that final damage assessment that's going to matter. It's the project worksheets we fill out that's going to matter. That initial data, just to let us get an idea of what's going on so we know who to deploy or what to deploy where. So here's the concept. Pretty simple. Agreements that we work out at a state level for the data sharing, for who owns the data, for how we get access, that then become a policy that we help our friends like Bud Mertz at a county level implement with their local utility representatives at that level. And what Tom and I have talked about, what I think is important that makes this work, is we always talk about day two. We're not talking about getting in there when we're pulling people out of water, when we're rescuing folks, when we're doing initial recovery and response actions. It's day two. It is when we're starting to look at preliminary damage assessments. It is when it's safe to get in there. It is when the utilities want to know what does it look like in this little town in Pennsylvania in terms of their distribution lines, right? I get transmission and distribution backwards. I'm thinking they're distribution lines. That's where I think the partnership works. That's where I think we're really going to be able to make a lot of strides. I sit on a statutory board in Pennsylvania called the GEO board. We are working on standard data sharing agreements with private industry over geospatial data. This is no different. I am not as worried about the data sharing agreements because I think we have enough statutes in Pennsylvania that will protect those. I'm looking at my friends from PUC. I never think about the regulatory part of it, so we're going to have to talk about it. But we're not talking about them doing anything other than they want to do anyway, just sharing the data at that local level. So that's one thing. I think we're going to make progress with that. Again, we have to find some new folks since Mike moved on here who was the key to it, and he really was. We had the same ideas, and we were moving, and I'll look to Tom to move that on. The second thing is, somebody said, where did he go? That it's hard to get rid of government employees. Really? Let me tell you something. And I think a lot of folks in utilities in private sector, and I was in private sector for a number of years, don't understand this. it's a funny thing in government. You work really hard. I think everyone comes to work. I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. No matter who you are, you're coming to work, you're doing okay, you're trying to do your best. Certain levels of government, you get to come and do your work every day. You're really not involved in big decisions. You're really not at a place where, and my FEMA friends, where you can actually affect policy. You can actually affect how business gets done. What's the priorities for that administration? What's the priorities for that agency, at least for the 4 or 8 years in our case, that you have the ability to do that? When you get at that level, my friend, they rid you like that. It is simple. That is the way life is. New administrations come in, federal or state government, they have an absolute right to have folks that have the same policy ideas they do come and work for them. It doesn't mean that people that were there before aren't excellent at what they did. It's just the country we live in. So 2 things happen. One is, if you live long enough and you're fortunate, you get to a level where you can affect policy. I'm lucky. There is the governor, my boss, and me. That's the hierarchy, right? So you're at a level where you can actually say, that makes sense, right? That we're going to commit resources to this. We're going to go in that direction. That's a great place to be. It also means that either next November or 4 years from that November, I'm not going to work anymore for this. I mean, that's just the way it is. So we've seen this cycle. So what I will tell you is, you got to get smart about it. The Fleet Response Working Group figured this out a number of years ago. You get the right policy people in the room when they're in power, when they have the authority to make the decisions, to put in place an organization that is sustained through private sector, because that makes sense to the private sector. That's what we're trying to do in Pennsylvania now with our Business Operations Center. I look at my friend Derek. He was around before. We tried this once before to make it all government-centric. We got a number of businesses together. We had more state people in the room than we had businesses in the room. It was a damn disaster. It really did not work. Hi. It did not work. I don't know, Tom's waving at me or telling me to shut up. It did not work the way we thought it would work. So I think we're going to do it a little differently this way. Molly's going to talk in depth about it. She's been tremendous on our team at driving this forward. So the idea here is we pick key businesses. We are going to have them come together for an initial meeting. We also hired the All Hazards Consortium, full disclosure here, for a couple of bucks to say, bring this model to us, because when I go away and Rick Flynn goes away, we'd like it to keep going, right? We would like it to keep going, driven by business, not dependent on who happens to be the next governor, right, or the director of FEMA. So we also want the businesses to understand that this is important to this governor, really important to this governor. So we have picked a number of key businesses in Pennsylvania, 15, 20 people, if I remember right, 30 businesses, and those agencies that are key to those businesses. So our PUC friends, agriculture, Department of Transportation, the secretaries and deputy secretaries of those businesses. And the initial kickoff meeting for this is in May, I think, Molly, May something or other. And it is at the governor's residence. It sets the tone that Pennsylvania is serious about this for the businesses that are coming in to say, this is how we're going to do it. And we're not going to go in there with, here's how this is going to work. We're going to go in there with a consultant and a facilitator to say, we want you to be back in business fast. We want to exchange data with you. We want to know what it is you want from us. And we want to develop a structure that lasts past the people in this room today. So that's the 2 things we wanted to talk about. I think I covered them. I do have one more time, one alibi. The first panel talked about liaisons and how important it was that we in government send folks that know what's going on. I would say the same thing. We had some trouble in Pike County in Pennsylvania a while ago. It took a long time to get the power back on. It was an unusual situation, really high winds, rural area, trees down on top of wires, down on top of roads you couldn't get through, and you really had all 3 entities. You needed a chainsaw crew, a utility crew, the Department of Transportation going street by street. It takes a while to organize that. We asked for some liaisons. They came from a utility company, nobody that's directly here today. And they did send government services liaisons that has as much operational understanding as that microphone. and it was a problem. And we had to ask, and then it got fixed. But I say it goes on both cases. I need to send you people that can help, and you folks need to send folks to EOC that really understand your operations, not policy. I'm done. I appreciate your time. I don't know if you take questions or not. Your choice.
We'll take a couple. Yeah.
No questions. Here you go. And I'm leaving the mic on for you.
Great. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
One question.
You just got to get passionate about this. You know, you just got to.
One quick question. No question. No question.
No question. Okay. All right, Jeff.
Seriously, I remind you of your questions, if you want me to.
Okay, my name's Ken Kilda. Yeah, I think you all heard from me earlier. I'm here to talk just a little bit about the sensitive information sharing environment that we're working on right now. It's the effort to really operationalize our ability to use information during an emergency. I'm sure everyone in this room has run into business challenges or operations challenges during a response where you're trying to figure out what's the right method to get business or operations back to business as usual or back to normal for your constituents during a response. And I have found, and I'm sure that all of you have found, the ability to bring together the right data sets in the right combination really helps expedite the ability to make decisions, bring resources to bear, and return things back to normal faster. And the ability to get that information is always critical. So this team is working on our ability to do that and doing a few things to make that happen. First, we're putting in place a process for members of these organizations to make submissions on either data resources that they think would be helpful or that they think we should go out and try to find so that we can start to prioritize the efforts there. And once we get those resources available to us to really assess them for the quality and the timeliness of the data and put an operational readiness level against that, Carrie, Karen, and Dave are going to talk in more detail about that later this morning or this afternoon, I guess. And I think you'll find that a very interesting discussion. I know I have over the last few months. And then, of course, once we ingest that data, is to make it available to everyone in this room so that you can use it in making those operational decisions during a response. And not only to have the information available, but this is a little more visionary, but be able to put it together based on the issue that you're trying to resolve. Because you don't need to see every data set at the same time, but you probably need to see more than one data set at the same time so you can paint the picture of what's going on out there and then make the right decisions. So that's a very quick overview of the work that this team is doing right now. The thing that I keep coming back to is I love the momentum that the team has built and really starting to bring some of these concepts to implementation, which is great. So with that, I'll pause and see if anyone has a quick question, and then I'll hand it back to Tom. No? Okay. Thanks. Tom?
Great. Thank you, Ted. Let me invite our public sector, public sector panel, Teresa. And we have on the phone, I think, Persia Payne Hurley from North Carolina and from Pennsylvania, Molly Doherty. Rob Glenn told me he is in the car coming. He'll be calling in for this one, but he'll be for the next one here. So, Persia, are you with us?
All right, let's hope I can. Okay, I think the microphone is on. Didn't want to embarrass myself up here. All right, good morning, everyone. It's still morning, right? My name is Sharissa Cooper, and I am the private sector liaison at the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. And so really and truly what that means is that it's my job to deal with the daily coordination, collaboration, communication with most of you folks in here from the private sector. That's done through our private sector integration program. And so really and truly, when I think about private sector engagement, it's all about realizing that yes, government can't do everything, and we do need folks in the private sector, but it's realizing that it's a two-way street, that you're communicating with us and we're communicating with you. So we'll kick the panel off, and I'll have some pointed questions for each panel member. I wish that Persia and Rob were sitting here. We had like a cardboard cutout or something of them, so you weren't just staring up here at the two of us. But so I'm going to direct my first question to my neighbor in Pennsylvania over here, Molly. And I'll start by saying that I really view the Business Emergency Operations Center concept as really that single point where government and private sector are able to connect. And there's this misperception that it's just government pushing information out to folks in the private sector. And that's really not the case. It's really that two-way communication, information sharing. We heard in the previous panel, really and truly, that there's some data points and information that folks in private sector need from us in government, but we need some information from you all as well. So I'm thinking about it, and I'm realizing, especially some of the smaller incidents that have happened. I know in Maryland that have also impacted Pennsylvania. The windstorm we had, some winter weather. We needed some information, but also even if something's not happening in our state, like we didn't have to deal heavily with the hurricanes last season. Thankfully, fingers crossed, knocking on wood, carrying every type of good luck charm I can to hopefully we don't experience that this year also. But we still needed some information. So if you all, utilities in particular, had trucks coming through our state and you needed way stations, bypass, tolls, whatever it is you needed, we still needed that, even though we were experiencing sunny skies. So Molly, my first question for you is, so based on that, what can private sector do to really move forward with the states to help us? We need you in private sector to help us understand your operational priorities and your needs to expedite recovery. And as always, one of the things that we're really trying to accomplish is really looking to get some recommendations so we leave here with just some good ideas and things that we can improve upon, actual action items. So Molly, take it away.
My name is Molly Doherty. I'm Director for External Affairs at Pennsylvania Emergency Management. And if there's something that we learned, well, there are a number of lessons learned, especially from the hurricanes last fall. First one being things happen in threes. And we found that we had the three major hurricanes, and then just a month ago, we had three major nor'easters. So I've come to always kind of rely on the rule of three and the 80-20 rule. But one of the most important lessons we learned from the hurricanes is that one highlighted, what do you do when there's a disaster, but the disaster didn't happen in your neighborhood? And we don't have the luxury of a declaration in our state to be able to work the processes and the things and the resources that we have. So during the hurricanes, when they first struck, we were primarily a pass-through state, where we had folks, utility companies coming through the state. And then a majority of the impact of the storms for us was recovery. So we've had over 3,000 people evacuate Puerto Rico and come to Pennsylvania, either temporarily or to become new Pennsylvanians. And one of the things that we learned from that is that there is no way we can quickly recover from any event, whether it's local or national or frankly international, without that partnership with the private sector. No single resource can handle the response and recovery. And that's where that partnership becomes so particularly important. And in Pennsylvania, Mr. Thomas had talked about the Business Emergency Operations Center, which is modeled very much after a number of our partners who've done this so well, like in North Carolina and Teresa in Maryland, and then certainly the National Business Ops Center. Those centers are a physical and operational representation of the relationships that we try to develop. So when we're using that ops center, that's where we're able to exchange the information. But we're only able to do that when we're able to develop those relationships before something happens. And one of the most important things that we need from the private sector is if there's information that you need, or if there are certain procedures that you follow, what are the decisions that you're having to make, and what is the information that you need to help you do that? And I'll give you an example. During the storms in March, we had 3 nor'easters that came up, and in Pennsylvania, it struck most heavily the northeast portion of the state. And something that's similar that happened in Pennsylvania that also happened in Puerto Rico is you can expect, and it's one of the reasons why FEMA is focusing so heavily on building resilient communities, you can expect the impact of whatever happens to be based on how well the infrastructure is maintained in that area. And so when you go into portions of the Northeast Pennsylvania, it's not just your electrical infrastructure, but it's also your communications. There are portions of Pennsylvania where you cannot get cell service. And so it's particularly important for the businesses that work there or the utility companies that are sending crews there, that they understand what the infrastructure is there. Because how you communicate and how you manage your crews and where you send them is particularly important. One of the things I've heard a few mentions from the private sector of using ICS and a unified command. And as we transition from, a regulatory relationship to a collaborative relationship, we can often be separated by a common language. And ICS can be one of them. One of the things that we learned during the storms in March was when, through the mutual aid, when crews were being sent to different portions of the state, or frankly, they were also being sent through the state, there's more than just emergency vehicles that you need waivers for. And if you, just like in Puerto Rico, if you send a crew to Puerto Rico, whether it's a utility crew or whether it's infrastructure or a logistics crew, or for us, a humanitarian aid crew, you have to be self-sustaining. You can't send crews down to an area. Oh, closer? Okay. I thought I was being told to be quiet, but which I'm sure I will be shortly. Yeah. Got it. You don't want to send folks to an area that's been struck and stay in hotels where survivors are trying to stay. And so when we had the storms in March, understanding that it's not just waivers for the utility vehicles, but also all of the support vehicles. And that's in the emergency management world, that's called mission support. So if you're sending trailers that are feeding, showering, housing your crews, we need to know that and have those conversations so that when we put together our waivers, we're able to put that in the forms and we're not having to do something twice. That helps speed that recovery. And that's particularly important. And so I think that as we transition to that collaborative side, learning how do we make those connections to have those conversations. And that's really where Jeff mentioned the meeting that we're having in May, where we're saying to the private sector, we want to have these conversations and we would like you to be able to lead them so that they sustain beyond just the administration. A little side note, I was a little nervous when Jeff talks about government employees not having their jobs. I always wonder where he's going with that one. It's my job, but is being able to have those conversations because we don't always know how to do that. And when we can have more than one business, if we can have a sector or we can have a group come to us and say, we need this, it's very helpful for me, because then it's not Molly, that private sector person who really wants to have this done. It's a collective. We have a number of businesses that need this, and many voices carries a lot of weight in being able to get that time on the government side to be able to have those discussions. Because there are a number of times where there are decisions that we have to make that we need to be able to explain to the businesses. And there are times that we can't change policy because we can't. We have a number of bridges. We cannot waive weight loads for a number of those bridges for safety. People will die. But we need to be able to have those conversations so that you understand that. Something that I would ask from this group in particular is a majority of our businesses in Pennsylvania are considered small business. So it's like less than, I think, 500 employees. We have over 250,000 miles of roadways in Pennsylvania. And we're considered a north-south corridor and an east-to-west corridor. And so we have a number of businesses that pass through, and we have a number of businesses just within Pennsylvania that manage their fleet movement. And during the storms that we had last month, we have a system, much like many states, 511. It was the first time we actually restricted commercial vehicles on the roadways. And we had a number of larger businesses that knew, okay, when these close, we'll be able to reroute and go through. And Pennsylvania is never going to restrict a road so that you can't use another one to get through. But what we found is that there are a number of smaller businesses that could probably use assistance from the businesses that have a heavy fleet component and do this all the time. And so when we have one business that calls and says, we would love for someone to show us the 511 system and then help us with how do we make rerouting decisions so that we know when there's heavy snow, what are the implications of our decisions to go here or here? That's a tremendous opportunity for government to be able to connect the businesses that make things work and make our communities resilient and then get out of the way. So one of my asks is to be able to go to a group and say, we would like to have a session with open to anybody with businesses that have a heavy trucking component. We can show our 511 system and how to use it during times of when we have, natural disasters, but then be able to go to this group perhaps, or another group and be able to say, is there somebody who's willing to come talk about how you make those logistics and rerouting decisions to help the other businesses in the area? Because that's really what we try to do in that exchange of information. It's not just two-way, it's multi-way. And the extent that we can get that interaction between the businesses is what helps make our communities resilient, that makes our jobs much, much easier moving forward. And that's all I have to report. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Molly. Molly mentioned so many good nuggets. And I'm always, walking advertisement for BEOCs, for state BEOCs, and also the NBEOC. So by a show of hands, how many private sector folks in here are connected to their state BEOC or the NBEOC? Okay. So now I'm going to ask a follow-up question. How many folks in here are from the private sector? So I saw a few private sector folks that didn't have their hand up. So I hope that sometime, in the near future, that you're able to connect with your state private sector liaisons. I know that Rob Glenn, the director of the FEMA Private Sector Division, is a part of this panel. He will be here in the room, I'm told by Tom. So I hope that you all, if you're not connected, will take that opportunity. Because as Molly mentioned, we need that conversation going early, but we also need it going often. It's not a one-time thing. We need this to be a continuous thing. And through the BEOC, whether it's your state or the National Business Emergency Operations Center, you're really connected. It's not just a public to private conversation, but oftentimes it facilitates that business to business conversation, which is so important because we know that in order to create resilient communities, we need everyone involved, and we need conversations going on across sectors, industry. We need everybody to be a part of the conversation. So Persia, are you on the phone?
I am. Hey, everybody.
All right. Hey, Persia. So I know that, Persia, you have a stellar Business Emergency Operations Center and a private sector program down in North Carolina. And you've really developed some processes and procedures that are really, landmark and, that other states are looking to try to implement. And you've had so much practice. Molly and I are not jealous. But Molly mentioned earlier that it's not just simply when something's occurring in your state, but also we saw in the after the 2017 hurricane season that you had this influx of folks coming in from impacted areas. And so, really and truly, Persia, so based on North Carolina's experience, and particularly I want you to kind of highlight, you dealing with folks coming into your state, evacuating from other areas. What are some next steps between states and private sector that we can take to move towards a higher level of unity of effort? I know that you and I have talked extensively about this, but can you share some of that with the group?
Hey, yeah, sure. So I'm happy to do that. And no pressure at all on me right now. Regarding what you said, I heard you. But really, I think that what you're talking about in particular, I'll talk about it, just touch on it, are the evacuees that we had, which was an added impact after Hurricane Irma. This would be folks that evacuated from Florida, of course, historical evacuation there, into Georgia and in South Carolina, and then coming further north into North Carolina. And we ended up with quite a few folks that stopped out right at the rest areas and those major highways coming out of South Carolina. And those numbers were huge. There were questions about whether or not we needed to do some type of mass sheltering operations, what we're going to do with these people over the 2 to 3 to 4 days that they needed to be housed, mass care, including mass feeding, sheltering. And that entire experience, we're thankful that it didn't last for a long time, but it was going to have an added impact on the counties in terms of their ability to shelter folks out of the state, not to mention when we didn't have actual shelters open. So I'm mentioning that because it presented something that we hadn't dealt with necessarily, at least not in many years. And I want to put forth what the private sector partners in my group are now considering, and I'm putting it out there for everyone to think about, and that is they are, and this is something that they came up with their own during our state exercise 2 weeks ago, and that is that they would get together in a private sector work group fashion around here and consider a kind of comfort station. They were calling it a comfort station, but it sounded more like a strip mall, something that they would put together as a private sector group if we were on the government side, would coordinate that. So this would be something that would be public supported and, private supported and public coordinated. So that was one interesting, at least proposed answer that still needs a lot of troubleshooting to the situation that occurred with the evacuees. And I think I answered your question, but that was something that was interesting that happened here.
Thank you, Persia. And so along with that, I have a follow-up question. So I know that in North Carolina, you have a BEOC asset board, and we know that during emergencies, there's this need for timely distribution of resources. And so can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to leverage the private sector to really address the needs of your community?
Sure, yeah, I would. The BEOC Assets Board is really a way so that we can collectively, when we talk about partnering in North Carolina, we're talking about access and also availability of information. So when the needs of the private sector become, public sector and the private citizens become obvious during a disaster, it's something that our private partners know right away, because their access to WebUC. This opening up of information has made the private sector involvement in terms of donations for lease at cost, for lease for rent at cost, or for donation, it's made it a lot simpler for them. It's a lot more immediate for them to help where they can. And this is something that they readily see sometimes before me. They see a situation coming because of something unfolding due to posting from a county, for instance. They anticipate what is probably going to happen, and they know their capabilities better than we do. So those offers for, hey, this is how we can help, or this is what we can do, come very quickly. So the BUC Assets Board has been a way that if there are things that they're anticipating before a need is actually there, that they can park that asset. It may be something for rental, for something for donation, something we didn't anticipate. It may be a sheltering facility that also has showers and cafeteria style capability. It could be anything that they want to offer, and that's where we park those assets. So when the county comes with that need, we can marry that asset to the need. We call it speed to the need because these things are typically delivered by the donor. So it is a very fast, immediate solution to a public need.
All right, thank you so much. What you're describing, it really shows the essence and the importance of that partnership between public and private entities. So it's not just, simply us pushing in the public sector, pushing out information to you, but it's really being able to leverage the resources that you have. But in order for us to leverage that, we have to know what you have, right? There's not much we can do if we don't hear from you. So thanks, Persia, for that. I want to kick it over to Rob Glenn. Rob, are you on the phone?
Yeah, I'm here. Good morning.
All right, great. Good morning. So we really saw during the 2017 hurricane season just the massive powerhouse that lies within the NBOC, and just really the phenomenal collaboration that went on during the calls and through the use of the dashboard. And I know that you all at FEMA described the NBOC as a clearinghouse. And really and truly, I saw it at the state level as really an opportunity to amplify the efforts going on at various levels of government and within the private sector. So we have a lot of folks in here that aren't connected with you all yet. So can you describe what the NBOC is and really the mission, who it's designed for, and what it does? And in addition to that, everyone sees, when the dashboard goes up and we see when the emails come out saying that, we're going to have these NBOC calls. What triggers that activating those calls and that dashboard?
Sure. So, I just want to say I'm actually in the car with Matt Wambacher, who is my counterpart at DHS Infrastructure Protection, and we really couldn't do what we do at FEMA without really strongly partnering with NPPD and across the interagency to harmonize how we actually work with the private sector during the dashboard, most significantly during the hurricane season of last year. So a couple things on the NBEOC. It was started in 2012, first tested during Hurricane Harvey, and over the subsequent years, whether it's in Hurricane Matthew and spearheading the development of a document to really make sure everybody understands the access protocols that are needed state to state. We really do provide, I think, a very positive information sharing environment between government and the private sector, with both sector leadership being able to make better decisions because we're serving as that bridge between both sectors. We do work to facilitate identification of barriers to private sector access, to consumption, infrastructure restoration priority, and really work towards accelerating return to normalcy, or normal can be in cases like Puerto Rico, and really alleviating dependency on on that temporary disaster supply chain, and also some of the other disaster-related networks that pop up. And the last, I think, purpose for the NBOC is really the solution against and align our priorities for the private sector from a capability standpoint. So as there's, scale up that unity of effort, unity of message, and really unity of impact to stabilize the situation. We right now have more than 750 member companies. During the height of the disaster season, we had over 1,200 on the NBEOC calls, and we probably the number ballpark that Matt and I have agreed to is more than 4,000 RFIs and more than 40,000 unique interactions with the private sector. So that's a lot of work. One of the things that we try to do, and I'll use this both from a, I guess, historical standpoint, but even from the context of expectation setting for the national level exercise that's upcoming over the next few weeks. As we look at, a threat making its way towards the mainland, again, it's using the hurricane model. So, it's safe to say about 72 hours before impact, we're already having an NBEOC call, which really gets together the private sector members of the NBEOC, the infrastructure owners and operators of the Cross-Sector Coordinating Council. And we're really working through what are the precautionary actions being taken from a business continuity standpoint, and really being able to identify any kind of potential shortfalls ahead of the storm, and then also to a degree of forecasting what the logistics laid out for FEMA would be. Because I know that our partners in the private sector do take our cues from us and what our posture is. One of the mechanisms that we, along with the NBOC, one of the mechanisms that we use to share information and foster that business connection as well is through the dashboard. The dashboard is very simply an Adobe Connect dashboard that we stand up. That really serves as an entry point for other pieces of information. So, for example, we'll have links to products from the Homeland Security Information Network on there. We'll have links to state sit reps, or we'll have links to other products from other agencies, either at the state level or the federal level or even non-governmental. One of the things that was tested and I think worked pretty well was both FEMA, the National Emergency Management Association, and the International Association of Emergency Managers, they jointly worked on a public-private information portal. We had the link to that on there as well, and that really served as a more robust mechanism to share information, including economic data from Dun & Bradstreet, et cetera. So that is a little bit about the NBOC and also kind of what the criteria for activation are. I think one of the other things to highlight is that we are part of the National Response Coordination Center, and so we're part of that broader interagency effort to make sure that the private sector is brought into the conversation, and also by virtue of that, we're able to work with the Movement Control Center and then also the resource support section, which Jeff Dorco leads from a logistics standpoint. And so we're really working together, and we're trying to make sure that from an agency or interagency standpoint, we're connected with NPPD and DHSIP, we're connected with logistics, we're connected with the operational decision makers. And one of the things that I think you'll see in the future is more dialogue ahead and more frequent dialogue at the leadership level between response leadership and FEMA, the prevention and protection leadership at NPPD, and then also the private sector. We're going to be testing some of those concepts out there in the national level exercise. So if you haven't yet decided to play in the national level exercise, commercial to play in the national level exercise, one of the best ways to do so is getting plugged into the NBEOC or any number of the states in FEMA Region 3 that are playing. So hopefully that's helpful, and they're ready for any kind of questions.
All right, thank you so much, Rob. So Rob mentioned something really important. The national level exercise is coming up. So if you're not involved, that'll be a great opportunity for you to get plugged in with your state BEOCs, the NBEOC, and really we had the past hurricane season happen, and there are many lessons learned that came out of that. So this is an opportunity to practice in a much less stressful environment to really put some of those lessons learned into action. So I would encourage all of you, if you haven't yet decided to play, signed up to play, really get connected and figure out how you can play, because I think that one of the great things about exercises is that it gives you that opportunity to forge new relationships. Because if you don't have that relationship, when the event happens, when you're in the midst of it, it makes it a little bit difficult to get some stuff done. So I would encourage you to really take a dive into that and look into participating in the upcoming NLE. So Rob, I have a follow-up question for you. It's about the FEMA strategic plan. And so can you talk about what part of the new plan will directly impact changes in public and private coordination and communication during events?
Sure. So the off-the-cuff kind of, what my dad would say, the smart aleck comment is, which part of the FEMA strategic plan doesn't allow public and private sector to kind of work together? I mean, and that actually is, as we look at the priorities of the strategic plan, the first is to build quality preparedness. There's an obvious opportunity there for us to work together ahead, whether it's a mitigation activity, closing the insurance gap, but also on things like training and exercise, which I thank you for backing us up on that. The other one is being ready for catastrophic events, catastrophic disasters. So there's a major tie to infrastructure there. There's a major tie to, and I know Jeff Dorco is probably going to talk about this afternoon, the supply chain effort to better understand and align with the private sector supply chain so that we can back off of the disaster supply chain as fast as possible. That obviously has an economic plus side, but it also has an opportunity to work more efficiently in a disaster. And the third, on the efficiency standpoint, is how do we reduce the complexity of FEMA? FEMA, like any government agency, is a bureaucracy. And for some of us who are part of the bureaucracy, we don't like the bureaucracy. And one of the best ideas to get better, smarter, faster, to some degree cheaper, more efficient, is to really tee off of ideas in the private sector. So by having sustained conversation with the private sector before, during, and after a disaster, I think we'll be able to work on those. I know, again, as I said, Jeff's going to talk, I'm sure, a little bit more about the supply chain effort that he's leading. But really, there's no shortage of opportunities to really plug into the FEMA strategic plan. And from Brock Long, our administrator's perspective, he says, America's blueprint for how do we get better prepared, how do we ensure that we're ready for the unthinkable, and how do we reduce the complexity of the standpoint. I'll be there this afternoon and can talk to more people one-on-one, but certainly more.
So Rob, I'm not sure if you were finished answering. It sounded like you got a little, were cut off a bit at the end. All right, so we'll move along. So we'll have a couple more questions, general questions. I'll pitch them out to all of the folks on the panel. But then I really want to have the opportunity for you all to ask some questions of us. So one thing that I want you to think about as we go through the next few questions with the panel is really and truly, as members of the private sector, so we realize in government that there are various levels of government. You have the folks that are on the ground, the operational folks, the local folks. You have the folks at the state level, and then you have the folks at the federal level. And we realize that can be a little confusing for you to know which level of government that you should be interacting with and when you should be interacting with them. So I want you to think about ways that we at government, any level of government, can help make it easier for you to communicate with us and think about ways that's best for us to share information with you across all levels, because it's really important for us to get to the meat of that. So I'll pitch this next question out to the rest of the panel. So really and truly, looking at lessons learned, what are some recommendations that you have for the Fleet Response Working Group, not just looking at the 2017 hurricane season, but also I know that Molly and I experienced some smaller events, and when dealing with the windstorm and some of the winter weather that we had earlier this year, I realized just the value and the impact of us being engaged and being a part of the conversations with the Fleet Working Group. We had an incident where BGE needed to get some trucks through the state of Maryland, and they wanted to know if they could bypass the way station. And it seems like a pretty easy question. It didn't take too long for us to get an answer. But if we weren't a part of the Fleet Working Group, we wouldn't have gotten that question. And it would have taken a while for it to come to us. And it might have taken them hours to get an answer, what took us all 10 minutes. So I realized that is just a value. And the more folks we have at the table is so important. So Molly, I guess I'll start with you, and then Persia, you can take it away after she's done. What are some nuggets of information, some nuggets of wisdom that you have to share?
I think, and Persia touched on it, and it's something that Persia in North Carolina, who has a phenomenal private sector integration program, something that she touched on that I think is really important, which is when there are businesses that come together and say, we want to do this, can you help us with the coordination of it? Or can you help us with planning of it? That's where government plays one of its best roles. We don't always have the money. We don't always have the ability to travel. But what we do have are a large number of government employees who are trained in emergency management. They're trained in logistics. They're trained in operations. And they all want to be able to help plan and do stuff that helps you. So Persia's example of the setting up the comfort stations and having the businesses come to North Carolina and say, will you please help us with the coordination of that? That's something that I would put out to you all, is that's one of the best ways to have your government work for you, because that's what we're trained to do. And it's something that because we are for the benefit of all citizens, we don't necessarily have the luxury of being able to go to a particular business and say, can you help me with this? But if the private sector, the businesses were to come to government and say, we would like to do this, can you help us? Chances are the answer is going to be yes, and we're going to figure out a way to do that.
Did you hear that question, Persia?
I did. I would say that, at least from a challenge standpoint, I want to mention it. It's been a challenge, I think, for a lot of us. It was for me to incorporate the private sector into the state EOC as much as possible. But I'm just making a point to say that it has been a huge benefit to our group to be incorporated at a level where they understand the workings of the state when we respond, when we get into recovery. They understand what we're doing when we're trying to prepare. And that deeper understanding for the private sector has opened up opportunities where they have come up with ideas like the one I just mentioned, that, hey, let's do comfort stations, or what else can we do? But that incorporation between private and public and the building of that relationship has allowed those kind of possibilities in terms of answers. So those questions that the private sector asks of us, I've been able to get a lot further with answers. So, and I'm going to make sure so that you ask before it's over, this group that's listening, what do you need? What are you not getting? What can we help you to accomplish to stay operational? And that's relationship building for us.
So I think that Persia posed the perfect question. And I will say that I think, at least speaking for Maryland, in my opinion, I won't speak for the folks at my agency, just in my opinion. You know that in government we always have to give that disclaimer. But I will say that I don't think we do a good enough job of really letting folks in the private sector know what we do in our BEOC. And we don't do a good enough job of harnessing your innovation, your ideas, and letting you bring those ideas to the table. We have a problem, and letting you bring solutions to the table. And so I think that we could do a better job of that. But you know, we, at the panel, we've answered a lot of questions. So I want to turn a question over to you, and I'll stand up. I feel more free when I stand. I talk with my hands. I'm very expressive. So this entire time, I've kind of had to sit on my hands. I wouldn't move it around. But so really and truly, as Persia asked, what do you need from us? Because that's so important for us to get so that we can serve you better. Because we can sit in our offices and come up with lots of things that we think are important, but if they're not addressing your needs, then we're missing the mark each and every time. So so who wants to start? I'll pick on people that you know, look me straight in the eye. So, you know, if you don't volunteer, I'll volunteer you. So who wants to? All right, Robin, I see you sitting up front. I see you sitting up front. So I asked the question, what do you need from government? What, you know, what questions can we help you answer?
Thank you for putting me on the spot, Trisha. I sat on panels with her before. She does this really well. So in terms of the role that I serve with Mid-Atlantic First and with the FSI SAG, the things that we need to be able to do is help the sector make open-close type decisions, but also during these main events that we saw, the main events that we saw recently, we were able to actually provide data back with the ISAC's help with like merchant reports. So down in Puerto Rico when we were doing work to determine, you know, there was a lot of confusion on even if there was power, were there transactions of capability and things like that. So it's really the reciprocal kind of communications that are important to us, and just to be able to keep fostering that, because what my experience right now is each event is significantly different. You know, that the type of data that we need is never the same. One of the other challenges is also having a spot to share that data. So the virtual BEOCs are really important to us. However, when you get, and you see a lot of that sharing go on at the national level, and what we're trying to do is, from the regional level, give the financial sector a little more secure space to share data that are not necessarily comfortable with sharing at that broad level. And then we'd pass that on to you. But it's kind of, you know, we want to create these funnels so that, you know, it goes back and forth that way. Does that help?
So that definitely, thank you, Robin. So that definitely helps. You know, I think that I'll put that into a broad bucket. Really and truly, what you need from us is timely and accurate information. So I see a microphone going. Go ahead.
Good. One of the things I think was said earlier is that I think the private sector needs is more of a responsive or adaptive sourcing mechanisms. I think some people said the procurement got in the way of, add delays, a lot of emergency management. And in a day of agile project management, and people want the cloud and people want things instantly, and being able to get things instantly and getting resources near instantly, is having pre-positioned adaptive sourcing vehicles in place where you can just order things in a blanket purchase order type of agreement, where you can just create the transaction as opposed to going the 3-bid process and all that. So having more openness to different procurement models. And one of the terms is adaptive sourcing, so you can just get what you need when you need it.
Awesome. Does anybody else have anything to add or have another question that you'd like to pose to members of the panel? How much more time do we have, Tom?
Good. We're good. I had a question. Nobody has one. Many times the private sector doesn't know what they need from the state until they need it, right? Because nobody thinks about that. A good example of that was, you know, we had Riley, I think, and Teresa, you mentioned it. I think a person who to call is important. I think the way you work the Hydro One issue, getting them through that way station without a delay is really good. Trusted relationships. Where are the forums in each state? But I think that on the spot, Mike, you and I talk about it, on that spot, you know, being inventive and creative, you know, Persia's still on the phone. She had a great story that I thought was a great example of a state, you know, being on the ball to work with it. Molly's done that, adapted. I think it's just trusted partnerships, and they figure it out on the way. There's some things you can get ahead of time, but others, most of the stuff just comes up. Persia, you still on?
Hi, Tom, I'm here.
Yeah, so Persia, talk about snack them up. Listen to this. This is a great story. This is a good example of private sector may not know what they need until it hits the fan, right? And I think it's the trusted relationships Persia has that you guys develop that really make this happen, because everybody can get the weather and the traffic, and we got a way to get declaration. We can get the predictive stuff. It's the unpredictable stuff that can kill you. So Persia, go ahead, tell them that story real quick.
And this is totally unexpected. Nothing that we fostered, and it was done at the lowest level. And that is that our North Carolina National Guard have been activated in support of, at the time, it was a winter storm. And they were positioned at different places. They had warming stations. They were also crews spread out, helping to get people out of the snow. And it's something that we do routinely so that we don't have backups on the interstate as far as folks that get stuck and bogged down. Well, our local partners over at Walmart noticed that the National Guard folks were posted at different spots around their store, and they started to, and they came up with the idea themselves that they felt like, you know, after a few hours, gosh, we should probably, you know, we think we can support them. So they called me and said, hey, Persia, we see the National Guard guys standing here and at this corner, that corner. Do you mind if we snack those guys up? Well, what do you mean? And they were talking about, you know, snacks, 5-hour drinks, and all of the rest, because it was very difficult to get meals and water to those guys with the traffic and the bad weather. So snack them up has kind of become a thing. With every activation, if the National Guard soldiers are activated, the local Walmarts always call and say, hey, just letting you know, we're going to snack these guys up. And it's just something that we do down in North Carolina. Well, Walmart does it, but it's something that's at the local level, local Walgreens managers, Walmart managers, and also at the regional level, it's really just a call to me, say, just letting you know, we're snacking those guys up.
So that's one example. There was another one you mentioned about pull and grab or something like that. Roads were blocked, and you had to get them cleared really quick so utilities could get in. Right?
No, you're talking about the current thing that I'm working on with Caterpillar Incorporated.
That's the one. Yeah, talk about that for a minute, because that's a good example of partnership in action.
Caterpillar Incorporated have been very kind to meet with me and have agreed to take on something that we call a clear and shove mission. This is with the Puerto Rico lessons learned in terms of roads being so blocked that the logistical supply chain had been interrupted for a long period of time. That was very disturbing, and we didn't want that to happen here, certainly. And the people at Caterpillar realized that they have obviously the ability to clear roads very quickly. So rather than get into a competition with any of the distributors or any other contract cost or agreement between the communities, the folks at Caterpillar are talking about actual mission force packages, a trained team, along with a piece of equipment that they're able to do the job as volunteers with the state of North Carolina under a MOA to clear roads in the event of an emergency. And this is immediate emergency activity, shove and continue on clearing the way.
So they approached you. You had an issue to clear roads. Private sector approached you. They put something together. Now you partner where they basically turnkey that for you.
No, that's absolutely. They're the ones that said, "Hey, it's what we would like to do. We can see this as a potential problem, and this is our offer." Now, this is a win-win situation. Obviously, their distributors are going to get to see the latest equipment that comes off of Caterpillar line designed to do this kind of work, and they'll be able to see it at work in emergency conditions in a disaster. So they're also going to act as acting for the public as volunteers in assistance to the state of North Carolina. So it is a win-win, and that's what I love, the win-win.
So this was the idea. If you're a utility, if you're a telecom, and your state or that state is doing that, it's good to know that, because now look at they will tell you what's being cleared right there. So this is an example of one of those things that comes through partnership that you don't think about ahead of time, but they develop through trusted relationships, which is really great. So, did you have a comment? Oh, Ken, sorry.
A quick question for you. As power and telecom providers, we're used to engaging with the state and partnering through the ICS structure at the state EOC. So just kind of interested to get your thoughts on the role at our partnership at the EOC versus the BEOC, and kind of how do you manage those two relationships at the same time?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, we can certainly start with you, Rob.
Great. I just want to mention that it sounds in your question that you've got the EOC separated from the BEOC, and in North Carolina, the BEOC is inside the State Emergency Operations Center, so it's one and the same for us. So managing that partnership, if you are a private sector partner, then you are also a member of the BEOC, and therefore, in North Carolina, you would be a state emergency response team member, just like Agriculture, Department of Commerce, North Carolina National Guard, or DOT.
Rob, did you have a comment as well? Oh, maybe not. Panel?
Ken, are you talking about the national BEOC or the North Carolina BEOC? At the state level. Got it. Okay. Got it.
The critical infrastructure role that we have, and then sometimes it's just not completely clear to me how you want us to interact with you as critical infrastructure providers in the traditional ICS structure versus being members of the BEOC, and how do you manage those two relationships? Both very critical to response, but a little bit different as well.
No, I agree with you.
Go ahead, Roger.
I just wanted to go on to say that our infrastructure group here, and we were arranged by ICS, our infrastructure group here, we have several members of the infrastructure group, the critical infrastructure guys, who have insisted on being included in the BEOC. Folks like Duke Energy in North Carolina, as well as our utilities, Water Warren, the train systems and freight, the dam group. That wasn't a joke. But they are part of infrastructure, but at the same time, they say they straddle the fence. They like the communications out of the BEOC. They are collaborative members that aid us when we're looking for solutions, but they sit in infrastructure when we're activated here in the EOC. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does.
This is actually something that came up, I know, during the hurricanes, in making sure there was a connection with the business operations centers, as well as linking them with logistics and operations. And I believe there was a NEMA recommendation to better connect those. And it's something in Pennsylvania we work through because we have a Public Utility Commission, and we have a Department of Environmental Protection. And we already have a number of agencies that have developed those relationships with private sector partners, either through critical infrastructure, through logistics and operations. The way we do it in Pennsylvania is whatever we call it, whether it's the Commonwealth Response Coordination Center or whether it's the Pennsylvania Business Emergency Operations Center, we have all sorts of acronyms for things that we call them, but it's still the same connection. So if Verizon is working with either the PUC or you're working with our logistics or critical infrastructure partners, I'm working with them as well. And so you can go to whomever you have those partnerships with and whoever you work with for those particular things. It's our job to make sure that we're connecting.
So I'll add to that and say that generally folks from telecoms and utilities, when we're having something in our state emergency operations centers activated, someone has a seat in our SEOC and is communicating with us. But I think that the BEOC adds an extra, it adds something extra. So when you have that connection to the BEOC, you really have the connection to all of state government. So our energy folks, the folks with the Maryland Public Service Commission. So it doesn't matter what seat you occupy, you're still going to have that connection because everybody, is on the same common operating picture and is talking to each other. So that's just the benefit. It's just an added resource. But I know that Robin over here, does that answer that question?
It does. Thank you.
Great. And I know Robin over here wanted to add something, and then we'll see who else has questions.
So working, okay. I just wanted to share kind of a success situation that we had with a hurricane season this year. When you start out, everybody's heard the saying that a crisis is no time to exchange a business card, and it's really true. You're talking about partnerships. But the ability to get information quickly when you don't have those partnerships, is extremely important. So I happened to be in that situation when the hurricane started happening, and I'm representing the NCR and Mid-Atlantic region. And within, I'd say no more than an hour or two, I had already gone with Sharissa, getting me in touch down through Virginia first, down to Persia, so you get to know all these names down to Georgia and all the way down into Florida and all the way to the banking commissioner with Puerto Rico. So, it worked like clockwork, even though you have a group of professionals who are extremely involved in just the response and preparation, that they're still able to put this kind of information out. So I find that the more we can do from the private sector to establish these channels ahead of time, the more I feel like it's my job to save them that work. I'd like them to be able to have a point of contact where I can service, 80% of the financial sector are those that are in the region that I'm responding to. A lot of times when you think of the ISAC or the FS ISAC, obviously the FS for financial sector, but crises don't really pinpoint a sector, not particularly. So you really are working with all these different agencies. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, and where the BEOCs or whatever you want to call them, that it really starts with that phone call, to pick up the phone and just introduce yourself and say, hey, does this matter? And one of the things I've found is in some cases, like with the district, it's super complex in that area with authorities and policies and things like that. Whereas, so the methodology used when I'm expecting data out of that region might be different. Louisiana may have a much more sophisticated credentialing program than, say, the district does right now. And all this work is taking place. It all starts with a conversation. Like you were saying, who needs to be there? For the most part, you're not going to hear about the mission support side until, you're already thinking, oh, I've got, so for me, it's about getting money into the area, physical hard cash into the area and things like that. So I just wanted to point that out and just say this is just a great forum. Thanks.
Other questions?
Hello. I'll try to make this quick. My name is Carrie Hicks. I'm a senior data analyst at Duke Energy. And this is more of a public policy or legislative point, but I still think it's kind of important. I'm currently serving as vice president of the Indiana Geographic Information Council, and that was actually instrumental in facilitating one of the most aggressive, inclusive data sharing policies in the country, where we actually have 100% county buy-in on certain key data sets like parcel data. And I really think that has played out as incredibly useful and important when it comes to emergency response. And I think that if the private sector could really come together and lobby and push for something like that at the state level, whereas the state also kind of energizes support for that kind of legislation, having that data from every county available during an emergency situation has been really critical in the state of Indiana. So I just wanted to throw that out there from the legislative perspective, the importance of data sharing. And not every state has a GIO or a Geographic Information Officer. Not every state has, you know, those kinds of infrastructures in place to support the sharing of geographic data. But just speaking from Indiana's perspective, it's been really, really helpful. So that's all.
We're good? Okay. Molly?
Here's my shameless promotion. We both Maryland and Pennsylvania will be participating in the exercise the second week of May, or first week of May. I think you're activating, you're the 7th. So Maryland will have their private sector, your dashboard, the dashboard on the 7th. Pennsylvania will be on the 8th. And so I have some fact sheets for Pennsylvania's program and cards. I would love to be able to share those with you and perhaps start that conversation on the 8th. And it would be great if you could start that conversation with Maryland on the 7th as well.
I will definitely second that. I don't have any fact sheets, but I do have cards. So if you'd like to participate, like I said earlier, this would be a good opportunity for you to really get involved. And I know that on the national level that they will have calls going on over several days. And the good thing about this is that you're not tied down to participating at a particular time in a particular place, but it's whenever your schedule allows. It's a really good moment just to start that conversation and to get plugged in if you're not already.
Very good. Charissa, Molly, Persia, thank you very much. Rob is on his way. I think he may be here for now. Let's give him a hand. Thank you very much for your energy here. Couple of administrative things. Number one, this afternoon is going to be focused on product, right? We've talked about policy and process today. Now we're going to look at product. So after lunch, we'll have a discussion on our information sharing products and approaches and strategies for that. Following that, we'll have a panel on the ORL. What's the ORL? Operational readiness level. Private sector gets data. They don't know whether it's ready for operations. They don't know if it's research. Hey, another 3 years and $2 million and we'll have a product for you. They're not interested in that. So how do we know what's ready and what's not? So this group formed a number of states and private sector. Carrie is from Duke is the chair, and public states are on that as well. They're going to talk about the ORL level. It's a federated standard that we hope to have FEMA and DHS and the consortium and private and public all work together. So we can all agree that, you know, this is a 1 and this is a 4, right? You'll know what the differences are, but it's a way of increasing confidence in decision making. Very important. And then at lunch, we're going to hear from our one of our sponsors, Arcos. They do a lot of work in the utility space. Great information product they're using. We're expanding the capabilities there, and we'll talk about that for just a minute. And then you'll see during lunch, you'll see a little slideshow. What is that? Some of you saw that during the break. That's the SICE. The SICE is open. It's in a pilot right now. The SICE is the Sensitive Information Sharing Framework. It's not a product. It's a place, right, that vets people and information and product, and it'll be third-party product, but it's all tied to one thing, use cases. There's no product in there that isn't there for a reason to solve a specific problem that the electric or telecom or food sectors have come up with. So everything in there is solving a specific problem. It's called the SICE, right? And there's an application process. It's going to be aimed at public and private together. We're going to launch it. We're in testing right now. I think many of you have, how many of you have logged in and opened an account? It's beta. You'll get a chance to test it out. We're in early stages right now. We're enhancing security. And at the end of the day, what the SICE will become is a framework that will vet every individual coming in many ways, okay, without issuing you a new credential. And it'll validate who you are. And then the private sector will determine what level of information you're able to see or not see, right? That's the whole point. It's run by the private sector, so it's not going to go away after an election or a grant runs out or things like that, which is great. But big partners in this are DHS and FEMA and S&T from Science and Technology, a lot of the private sector folks. Fantastic public-private framework, but it was built for one reason, is to share sensitive information with the right people for the right purpose, right? That's what was great about it. So we've got a lot of people working on that, right? So if you see it running, you'll see what I'm talking about. We're very excited about that. Why? It's tangible, it's usable, and it solves problems, right? So lunch is served out in the hallway. Help yourself. We'll reconvene back here at about 12:45. Okay, thank you.